Number 5. Al Worden. American test pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut Alfred Merrill Worden was the module pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission in 1971. One of the 24 people who have flown to the moon. Woohoo! He's got a couple of firsts, though. He orbited it 74 times in the command module. He was the first to drive a moon car. After Apollo 15 reached lunar orbit and his crewmates departed, and Worden spent 3 days alone in his module. That's terrifying. Traveling the furthest out from any other human. After he returned, the crew and him became involved in a NASA controversy, however. Not over leaked alien info, but over postage stamps they had taken to the moon. Yeah, big no-no apparently. They were reprimanded by NASA and did not fly in space again. Worden remained at NASA until 1975, then entered a private sector. And then it gets weird. On a British television morning show, Al Worden started talking about some interesting stuff. They asked him, "Why should we keep going back to the moon?" He paused and replied, "Survival. Survival of our species." Worden also rejected the notion that humans could colonize planets within our solar system, calling them unsustainable. Then he claims he knows where to find habitable planets. When pressed on aliens if he believes them or not, he said, "Yes. You know, I've been asked that question hundreds of times. Yeah, we are the aliens though. We just think there's somebody else. But we were the ones who came from somewhere else because somebody else had to survive. They got in their little spaceship and they came here and they landed and they started civilization here. And if you don't believe me, go get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they have to say about it. They'll tell you right up front." End quote. Okay, when you hear an astronaut say that, kinda jarring. Number 4. Roswell. As always, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button. Birth of the UAP phenomenon. 1945. The US's first nuclear explosion. 1946. First underwater nuclear explosion. 1947. The first crash flying saucer. Coincidence? I think not. Especially since they've been known to hover around nuclear bases. Probably for the better. Humans are kind of the worst. Local rancher Mac Brazel finds the wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Sheriff Wilcox shows RAAF's commanding officer Colonel Blanchard the materials, and during the night, the Air Force combs the entirety of the property, apparently harboring 2 small injured alien bodies. Taking them, of course, to Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico that night. And the very next morning, the Roswell Air Force makes a statement claiming they have recovered a crashed flying disc in local newspapers. Boom! History, baby! Photographs of Jesse Marcel, the head intelligence officer who investigated and recovered some of the debris. The very next day, the Army retracts their statement and all of a sudden, a high-altitude weather balloon. Can you believe that, huh? AKA the birth of a conspiracy theory. Nuclear fission explosions, weather balloons. Something's not adding up here. Number 3. Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Dean Mitchell was a U.S. Navy officer, aviator, test pilot, engineer, NASA astronaut, and of course, a ufologist. Ufology is the pseudo term for somebody who studies the UFO phenomenon. I don't think there's a degree you can get that in. If so, I'm signing up. What school? Sorry? He was the lunar module pilot of the Apollo 14 in 1971 and spent 9 hours working on the lunar surface. He was the 6th person to walk on the moon. Yeah, he was walking while Worden was up there drifting in the currents of space. Mitchell publicly expressed his opinions and that he was sure that there were thousands of UFOs recorded since the early 1940s belonging to other planets. Thousands. Dateline NBC conducted an interview with Mitchell in 1996. He talked about meeting with officials from 3 different countries who claimed that they had met extraterrestrials in person. Quote, "The evidence for alien contact was very strong and classified by governments, who were covering up visitations and existence of alien bodies in places such as Roswell, New Mexico." Mitchell's book, The Way of the Explorer, discusses his journey. In 2004, he told the St. Petersburg Times that the US government was studying alien bodies and that this group had specifically stopped briefing US presidents since the 1960s. He said, quote, "We all know that UFOs are real. Now, the question is, where do they come from?" In 2008, Mitchell then was interviewed and claimed that Roswell crash was in fact the aliens that had contacted humans several times, but that the government had hidden the truth for more than 60 years. Scary stuff, scary stuff. He sadly passed in 2016. If we just reread the credentials alone, just one more time. Number 2, James McDivitt. James Alton McDivitt is an American test pilot, Air Force pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut who flew in both the Gemini and Apollo programs. After graduating first in his class with a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical engineering, he qualified as a test pilot at the Air Force. In 1962, McDivitt was selected by NASA for the Gemini 4 mission. In 1965, he saw, filmed, and photographed an object which approached the Gemini 4 as they were orbiting Earth. Over Hawaii, a craft of some sort. The UFO had a long arm sticking out of it. Here's what Major James McDivitt said. "I was flying with Ed White. He was sleeping at the time, so I don't have anybody to verify this story, but we were drifting in space when suddenly an object appeared in the window. It's a cylindrical object, white. It had a long arm that stuck out of the side. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians. One of them selected what he thought was what they were talking about, at least before I had the chance to review it, and it was not the picture. It was a picture of a sun reflection on the window." So what were the pictures that he was talking about? In 1975, McDivitt said, "I never made a big deal out of it. It was something I definitely couldn't identify. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it. Yeah, I would eventually give up on that too if those were my credentials and people were like, yeah, right, James." When somebody has like 25 years of designing and flying space shuttles around, when they say, "Hey guys, I'm seeing something up here," it's not like, "Oh, James, clean those old specs, would you? Yuck, yuck." Houston, we have a problem. And number 1, Gordon Cooper. Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr., an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, U.S. Air Force pilot, and the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, the first human space program in the United States. You know the pictures. It looks like they're wearing a tinfoil suit, you know? Old school, old school. After service as a fighter pilot in World War II, he qualified as a test pilot in 1956 and then was selected as an astronaut in 1959. In 1963, Cooper piloted the longest and last Mercury spaceflight, Mercury Atlas 9. 34 hours in space. The first American to spend an entire day in space, the first person to sleep in space, and the last American launched on a solo orbit mission. In Cooper's autobiography, Leap of Faith, co-authored by Bruce Henderson, he recounted his experiences with the Air Force and NASA and an alleged UFO conspiracy. Cooper claimed to have seen his first UFO while flying over Germany, then saw them land in a dry lake bed. Cooper claimed up until his death that the US was indeed covering up UFOs. He said that there were hundreds of reports made by his fellow pilots, many coming from the military pilots on radar. In his memoirs, Cooper wrote that he had seen unexplained aircrafts tons in his career, and that in 1978 he actually testified before the United Nations on the topic. He sadly passed in 2004. He was such a strong advocate for disclosure, and all of these astronauts are remembered as putting their neck and name out on the line for some truth. But I mean, those UFO enthusiasts, huh? They're all wackos, right? Right? Number 5, Leland Melvin. American engineer and now retired NASA astronaut Leland Melvin has spent hundreds of hours in space. Literally hundreds. Leland holds 4 honorary doctorates for his service in education, the sciences, and philanthropy. Doctorates. I'm just saying that before the comments start rolling in saying he's just another wacko. He's crazy. They're not wackos, people. Any of them. They've been screened so many times by so many people with so many tests, they have to be damn well near perfect before going up on or in NASA's budget. Before his career with NASA, Leland was actually All-American for football. Detroit Lions, Toronto Argos. Guy made the NFL and then said, you know what? I think I'm gonna be an astronaut. Like, give this guy a Netflix movie, would ya? He was selected by NASA in 1998 after getting injured with a football career. Guy goes from the turf to working at NASA Langley Center. This guy's put in time, both down here and up there. Mission after mission with NASA. He's got quite the practice at the whole floating around thing. When Leland was pressed about otherworldly visitors and his ideas about the cosmos, he said this when he was working up in orbit. He had seen something translucent, curved and organic looking when he was working with fellow astronaut Randy Bresnik. The pair of them, called down to NASA to ask what it could be. NASA's official response was, probably ice. Yeah, nice and specific there, Houston. Thank you for that. When has NASA ever said probably? Melvin dismissed this and figured it was NASA's explanation to just cover it up. Like, who's more qualified here? That's all I'm asking. When the most qualified people are like, yeah, I can't tell if that's frozen water or a full-on mothership, Houston. Either they shouldn't be up there at all, or we need some more Windex on those windows there, NASA. Huh? Number 4. Ivan Wagner. As always, if you dig what we do here at Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button or comment down below. Speaking of falling into a wormhole of conspiracy and who said what, astronaut Ivan Wagner, or I should say cosmonaut Ivan Wagner, since he's Russian by birth, and although he's bunking up with some roomies up there on the ISS, he was on the ISS as a first-timer just back in 2020. Does NASA initiate rookies up there? Like pull pranks on the newbies? Like no gravity, just unbuckle you while you sleep, flow you out, you know? He and fellow Russian Anatoly Ivanishin were working up there alongside Chris Cassidy, the American commander of said expedition. When Wagner was orbiting the Earth, he might have captured some footage of UFOs, better known as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. The jargon nowadays. The aurora lights behind Earth's beautiful curves was being recorded from the ISS when he saw a string of really weird lights moving in a really weird way. He labeled the video Space Guests. Wagner tweeted the vid, which apparently shows the aurora australis near Antarctica, and then all of a sudden this blob of organized lights just cruises on over the globe. Looks like a blob of like glitter just trucking across space. Like, what is that? Of course NASA didn't follow up. Like, what are they gonna say? Oh yeah, those are stars that move and blink, I think. I mean, no? Space junk. Yeah, space debris and swamps and things. Also, what a lame excuse. Space junk? Okay, so you're saying there's lots of litter up there, that's what you're saying? That's what just zipped over my house silently, defying gravity and lasered up my cow? Yeah, I don't think so, NASA. Number 3. Chris Hadfield. Retired Canadian astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, and musician. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hadfield flew 2 missions and also served as commander on the International Space Station. Before his career as an astronaut, he served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 25 years as an Air Commander fighter pilot. So he has the credentials to say the least. In 1992, Hadfield was accepted into the Canadian astronaut program. He first flew in space in 1995, and since then, he says he's seen tons of stuff up there just zipping around that even a man with all those credentials says he can't explain. Quote, "I've seen countless things in the sky, but he has a pretty cool take on it. He doesn't keep it on the DL, he doesn't boast, and he doesn't panic. Seems like Chris has the mentality like, quote, to see something in the sky that you don't understand and then to immediately conclude it's intelligent life from another solar system is the height of foolishness and lack of logic. However, Chris seems to have a little dirt on Mars that maybe we all don't. He said, I think the fundamental question is that Mars was a lot like Earth 4 billion years ago when life first formed. So if it happened here, did it happen there? It would be evident somewhere in the geologic records. All we need is one fossil for proof. He thinks there could be potentially alien life in the clouds of Venus or on the distant moons of one of our gas giants. Researchers have suggested that there could be microbial life in the clouds of Venus because of the presence of ammonia, which on Earth is a key indicator of aquatic life. Aquatic life, eh? Atlanteans? Hadfield on the UAP phenomenon, quote, "We have 7 people living up there. We've been sending people to space since I was born. I spent half a year off planet looking everywhere. It makes no sense at all that intelligent life somewhere from not our solar system could cross interstellar space and just sneak around and only be caught on some strange video by fighter pilots. It just doesn't pass any basic sniff test or logic. It's fun, it's exciting, but if you use reason, the whole argument falls apart." End quote. Okay, Chris Hadfield, keep your secrets from now, you polite Canadian you. Wait till people start looking into Paul Hellyer, another very polite Canadian with some secrets of his own. Until then, you keep distracting us up there with that guitar, Chris. I see you, Jake Sully. Number 2, Michael Collins. NASA veteran and the very first driver up there, Mr. Michael Collins himself served as command module pilot on the historic Apollo 11 mission in 1969. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the very first time, saying those very first famous lines we all know so well, Collins was back parking that thing up there. Mr. Collins stayed up there by himself in lunar orbit waiting for the safe return of his crewmates. I can't even stay in a basement with the lights off by myself. Imagine being up there just drifting in the currents of matter, like being in the middle of the ocean. Yeah, no way, dude. The astronaut retired from NASA in 1970 and spent his free time answering questions on Twitter. Apparently, he has gotten some really interesting buzz. Mr. Collins invited the interweb to chat, saying, quote, "Are we alone? Hashtag Ask Michael Collins." And boy oh boy, did he get some responses. Everything from wackos who like aliens to very, very high-ranked generals and pilots who are apparently also wackos who like aliens for talking about this. Collins, quote, "I used to think that NASA sent me to the wrong place, to the moon. because I think Mars is a much more interesting place, end quote. Collins has talked about it in the past about the possibility of alien life existing beyond Earth and doesn't shy away from discussing the topic in full. In 1999, for instance, he even argued on the topic of life developing in other parts of this infinite cosmos. So maybe it has then. He wrote in his book saying, quote, "I am alone now. Truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. Although I may feel like I'm the same person, I also feel that I am different from other people. I have been places and done things you simply would not believe." Collins circled the moon once every 2 hours. What's scarier, walking on an unknown rock that apparently no one's ever visited, or flying all the way around it by yourself in the pitch black with no communications? Collins achieved the rank of Major General. He left NASA in 1970 to join the State Department and later became director of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington. One of the most key players in this whole thing. Michael Collins sadly passed in 2021. Number 1. Buzz Aldrin. Of course, the poster child for the whole phenomenon itself, Mr. Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. American astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot with a doctorate of science and astronautics. This guy is overqualified, okay? 3 spacewalks in 1966, Gemini 12 mission in 1969, Apollo 11 mission. He and mission commander Neil Armstrong were the first 2 people to land on the moon. Quote, "There was something out there, close enough to be observed. What could it be?" According to Aldrin, on Apollo 11 to the moon, quote, "I observed a light out the window that appeared to be moving alongside us. What could that have been other than a spacecraft from another country or another world? It was either the rocket that had separated from us or the 4 panels that moved away when we extracted the lander, right?" After he returned from his missions, he was convinced he saw aliens while he was out there. Credentials aside, he took a lie detector test, people, which he passed with flying colors. In an interview with C-SPAN Buzz, he talked about the future potential of Earth's moon for humanity. He added a little extra info that might have gained the spark to go back, regarding a certain monolith on a moon. Quote, "Visit the moon Phobos of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato object that goes around Mars once in every 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're gonna say, 'Who put that there?' And you bet, Buzz, I'll be the first one to ask that."
Number 5 on this list is the Navy UFOs. This is one of the most famous alien or UFO encounters the humans have had in the last few decades. Reader's Digest says, when it comes to extraterrestrial life and making contact with those from outer space, everyone has an opinion. Some think it's all a hack, some are open to speculate, and others still are entirely taken with the tales and stories as old as time, cameras poised and tinfoil hats at the ready. UFOs have fascinated and confused us for years as each new flying saucer or hovercraft sighting makes national news and splits us into 2 camps. While it's easy to debunk individual stories, it's way harder to argue with the US Department of Defense. In videos leaked back in 2007 and 2017, the Pentagon has aimed to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage that has been circulating was real. In the video, unidentified objects are seen spinning and hovering in the air and above the water, while 2 Navy pilots remark in shock and confusion over the 2 oblong disc-shaped objects. So you may be thinking, well, how did the government try to hide it if they were the ones that actually released it? Well, they did release it themselves, but we have to remember that that was only after the videos had been leaked. In 2007 and 2017, these videos had made their way to the public without the government stamp of approval. So everyone was freaking out and speculating on what the heck this thing could be and why we hadn't heard anything about it. What the heck it is, I don't know, but why we hadn't heard about it is because the government had chosen not to tell us. The only reason that they inevitably released the videos is because they got their hand caught in the cookie jar. They were found out. They were exposed when these videos were leaked. At that point, they could either continue to vehemently deny something that was clearly pointing towards naval activity, or they could fess up and release it themselves in hopes of taking less public backlash. They opted to do the second one because, in their words, they wanted to clear up any misconceptions by the public. That, however, is code for, we got caught and we think that releasing it now would be better for us in the long run. If it was up to them though, these never would have seen the light of day. Which then makes you wonder, how many other videos like this are out there that you and me we just don't know about. Number 4 on this list is the O'Hare incident. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport had quite the interesting experience back in 2006. Reader's Digest says, on November 7th, 2006, United Flight 446 was about to depart from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport when a dozen United Airline employees spotted an odd metallic craft hovering over the gate. The employees reported that it hung in the air for several minutes before finally shooting up at breakneck speed into the clouds. The strangest part? The UFO did not register on the airport's radar despite all the witnesses. The FAA declined to investigate, chalking it up to a weather phenomenon. A weather phenomenon. Seriously? Yeah. Alright there, guys. Also, for those who don't know, the FAA stands for the Federal Aviation Administration, and they're a government-run agency that deals with pretty much anything that flies. So don't get it twisted, guys. This was definitely the government deciding that they didn't want to do anything with this incident, or at the very least, they didn't want the public to know about it. But you'd think that they could come up with a better excuse than a weather incident, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've ever seen a weather incident cause odd metallic things to hover in the sky. Number 3 on this list is the 7 strange crafts. So this one is really interesting because the government did address it, but they definitely didn't chalk it up to being what a lot of people thought it was in Aliens. Reader's Digest says a 1952 incident where 7 unidentified objects appeared over secure airspace near the Pentagon was captured on film. The crafts were registered on radar and jets were immediately sent to investigate these suspicious strange crafts. However, when the American jets approached that airspace, those 7 objects disappeared from the radar. When the jets landed, the objects returned to the radar screen once more. President Harry S. Truman was notified, and Air Force Intelligence Director General Sanford held a press conference saying that there were reports made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It's this group of observations that we're attempting to resolve, but there was no resolution. So we kind of just heard from the government that they were on it, but then didn't really hear anything after that. There was no resolution, or at least there wasn't one that was released to the public. Could I believe that they did actually discover something here, and they just decided that telling the public wouldn't be the best course of action? Absolutely I could. In fact, I almost guarantee it. I highly doubt that the American government would have seen this stuff and then after one pass with the jets just been like, well, alright, guess nothing's there, and then call it quits. No, they definitely would have kept investigating and looking until they discovered something. Telling the public about that, though, probably wasn't in the cards. Number 2 on this list is the Richard French incident. So this is definitely one of the bigger cover-ups in UFO government history. Reader's Digest says in the 1950s, it was Lieutenant Colonel Richard French's job to explain away UFO phenomena for the government. There was only one problem. Lieutenant Colonel French actually saw alien ships with his own eyes, reports the Daily Mail. At a citizen hearing on disclosure in 2013, the then 83-year-old man told the truth for the first time about what he saw as a young man in the waters of St. John's, Newfoundland, 2 UFOs that had crashed and sunk in the water, and aliens trying to fix them. They succeeded and took off. He didn't mention UFOs in his report at the time. How's that for a freaky government cover-up? Yeah, so that's about as government cover-up as we can get, guys. My guy legit says UFOs saw aliens and specifically omitted it to save face and not panic the public. I guess the guilt and also just the whole story had been eating away at him for decades though, and eventually he had to come clean and tell the public. Too little too late though with a story like this, because we never got an opportunity to investigate these aliens or talk to them or anything. Or at least, that's if he's telling the truth. For all we know, he's still leaving some parts of the story out. Only the government and Richard really know what happened. And number 1 on this list is the unexpected visitor. A man named Rick Porcels, who lived in Texas, got a very unexpected and unwanted visitor late one evening at his home. The story goes like this. In 2008, an unfathomably large aircraft hovered above Stevensville, Texas. Many people in the community saw it, and according to the Mutual UFO Network, a pilot named Stephen Allen reported that the unusual aircraft was flying at an estimated 3,000 miles per hour and was being chased by fighter jets. Then, a man named Rick Sorrell said he saw the same thing while hunting. Later, Sorrell says a strange man knocked on his door and said, "Son, we have the same caliber weapons you have, but we have more of them. You need to shut your mouth about what you saw." Can you imagine getting a knock on your door and it being the government basically telling you that if you say anything, you're gonna die? Yeah, that is definitely an unexpected and unwanted visitor if you ask me. So not only were they threatening citizens, I also didn't hear any reports from the government about that jet that was flying behind the UFO. You'd think that if a jet fighter were deployed to chase down an enemy aircraft in friendly airspace, the public should probably know about it to stay safe. But nope. Absolutely nothing. Total radio silence from the government. How many other times have they gone to someone's house and threatened them like this that we don't know about? How many people have been intimidated by the government to stay silent? Really scary question that, honestly, we might not even want to know the answer to.
Number 5. TikTok sighting. Our first entry on this list comes to us from a very reputable source, TikTok user Drillabang, who posted this video recently online. The caption, "We caught them out there," is almost Mulder's catchphrase of "the truth is out there." Almost. And it seems like they are. The video shows a short clip of someone filming the sky and clouds, and passing through the clouds slowly is something. It's kind of hard to tell. It's an unidentified flying object. A small black being with what looks like tentacles protruding from it, like a little black jellyfish. The entity is moving slowly through the sky, with what looks like an electrical field following all around it. The being appears to be electrical, possibly a small mechanical drone. My first thought looking at one of these things is just how much this thing looks like the Sentinels from the Matrix. Could very well be evidence of the simulation leaking through. This clip is undeniably pretty odd. It's hard to make out just how big this flying entity is, although it does look a little bit small, but really it's hard to tell. Is it a spacecraft? Is it a living being but biomechanical? Is it a drone? Of course, it has to be said, the clip, as impressive as it is, could very well be a high production hoax. Like I said, the thing really does look a little too perfect for me, and it looks a lot like one of those Matrix Sentinels. I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if it's a shrunken down 3D model of it used for the video. But real or fake, you can't deny that the video is captivating and has people talking. Well, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments about this one if you think this has you convinced. And hey, while I've got you here listening, you want to see a whole lot more spooky stuff this month? Well, I got news for you, pal. I got boxes full of spooky stuff. Subscribe for a fresh fright in your inbox delivered daily. Number 4, Chilean UFO. Our next entry was posted to Reddit on r/aliens. I mean, where else are you gonna find alien clips? The video posted is filmed from a mountain in Chile, where a group of friends on a hike found something amazing in the sky, and luckily had their phones on them to record it. This entity floating around them doesn't really look like your traditional UFO sightings. It looks like a ball of pure energy just hovering above them in a triangular shape, looking like distilled pure light or just some photons or something. Looking around in the background, you can see there's nothing around them. No airports, no mysterious army bases nearby, just a big mountain range and a bizarre glowing ball of light hovering around aimlessly. A user on Reddit offered a rudimentary translation of the friends talking, which adds a little bit of insight to the clip. We can hear the friends joking that it could be a spirit bomb from Goku and there's going to be an epic duel soon. Goku is technically an alien, so I guess if Goku was real and you saw him flying around in the Nimbus cloud, that would qualify for a UFO sighting. They go on to joke that it looks like something out of the movie Independence Day. It's really hard to say just what this thing is. Now, usually I tend to roll a little bit more Scully than Mulder, and I'm naturally a bit skeptic, but I am completely out of ideas looking at this thing. The edges of the triangle are so very visible, and it doesn't really seem like it follows any one particular flight pattern. I can't take even the slightest guess what this might be, so your guess is just as good as mine, my ghouls and goblins. Take a look for yourself, and decide for yourself what the answer is. Number 3, the Ring of Light. Another entry coming to us fresh from Reddit, posted by user Jesse Zell. A short clip that shows us something incredibly bizarre. The clip is captioned appropriately, "The most unexplained thing I have ever seen in my life," and I'm strongly inclined to agree. Take a little look-see. In the clip, we get a pretty good shot at a suburban house and the overcast night sky above. A little bit above the house, there appears to be a ring of light that appears, circling around, appearing a few lights at a time, rounding the house a few times. That's bizarre. Even the skeptics should buy into this one. I mean, it's easy to just imagine a flying saucer hovering a little bit out of view atop the clouds, descending its undercarriage lights on the neighborhood. A user in the comments proposed that it could just be nothing more than a series of spotlights. But the original poster and uploader of the video insists that from where they were standing, the lights are appearing above the clouds, not below them. And even then, what explains the perfectly circular pattern displayed? The user goes on to say that there was no particularly loud noises emanating from around the skies, and it was very hard to make out what was happening. They go on to add that they're very familiar with drones and have drones flying around their home with some regularity. I'm hoping they mean just a neighbor or an enthusiast and not that they're being watched. And that they would recognize a drone if there was one, and that they are certain these lights were not caused by drones. So just what is causing it? What was it? Is this Reddit user being observed by someone from the stars? Are they potentially a target for an abduction? We eagerly await a follow-up on this one. Number 2, the cube. Posted to YouTube by user, well, fittingly named, Is This a UFO? This brief 20-second clip showcases a pilot filming from inside the cockpit. Also, side note before I start talking about all the alien stuff, is that safe? Are you allowed to be doing that? I guess the plane doesn't crash in the video, so I'll take their word for it. Anyway, the clip is really short and sweet. We see from the window that there's a small cuboid-like shape blasting through the sky. The footage is extremely clear, unlike most UFO footage, and it's really easy to see what's happening, although it doesn't help matters much or provide you with any clear answers. What we can see is a small black cube propelling itself forward. There's no trail of smoke, no lights flashing, just a small black cube flying around. So what is that? Some comments in the video suggest that it could be a weather balloon or a helium balloon, although I gotta say the altitude is a bit questionable, or why it's traveling horizontally so fast. Its travel in the video does seem a bit pointed and intentional, like it's trying to get somewhere, although that could just be me wanting to apply sentient traits for it because I badly want to believe. Interestingly though, in 2014, a report from a 10-year Navy pilot veteran, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that in his service, he would see UFOs nigh daily and would report them constantly, only to have his reports ignored. Interesting. He said in his time in the service, he'd see unexplainable objects flying by him at hypersonic speeds with no trails, no exhaust, often 30,000 feet up in the air undetected by his radar. He said one of the more consistent things that he would see was an object that looked like a sphere encased in a cube. Kinda sounds a bit like the cube propelling itself forward in this clip, doesn't it? Fascinatingly, after this report from Graves, the Navy announced it would be changing the way it handled UFO reports internally. Perhaps there's something they know and they're not telling us. Number 1, the laser pointer. And finally, we're down to our number 1 clip. Now this is my favorite clip of the bunch, by far. I mean, I would hope so, otherwise why would I bother putting it at the number 1 spot? This clip also comes to us from Reddit from user Luke511, filming above him what appears to be a ball of light bouncing around bizarrely in the sky. A UFO if I've ever seen one. Luke, who when faced with the dangers of the unknown, the wonders of the cosmos, possibly standing on a chance to make that fabled first contact with another civilization with unknown frontiers, stood proudly and takes a laser pointer out and starts flashing it upwards to the sky. Now I have nothing but respect for this absolute madman who got right down to brass tacks. Because him flashing that laser pointer made this video go from, oh, maybe that's a UFO, to, oh, that is definitely a spacecraft being piloted by an intelligent being. In the video, as soon as you see him flashing it around, the vehicle maneuvers on a dime, trying clearly to avoid the laser, which is pretty damning. Now the reason I love this clip so much, besides the fact that I do think it's pretty concrete evidence, assume these really are aliens flying around in that spacecraft. Imagine you're coming down to a new planet and you see a green beam coming from the ground pointing directly at you. Do you think they were freaking out? Do you think they were losing their minds, panicking that they got made? That laser was gonna come for them and destroy them? Or do you think it was more like a kitten situation? Like they saw the laser and got distracted by a really enticing game of intergalactic chase? Luke511, this has gotta be a top moment for humanity and for you as a whole. Tagging a UFO with a laser beam and potentially scaring alien life has got to be a landmark moment for us as a species. My only concern is that maybe this event might have sent intergalactic relations back just a little bit. I'm hoping aliens aren't afraid to visit the planet now because of the danger of green lights. We'll turn them off, we promise. We're sorry, it was just a little prank. Number 5. SCP-2019. Our first SCP featured on today's list is Euclid class organism SCP-2019. This sapient cubical organism appears to us as a green gelatinous substance held in place by a thick, transparent membrane. The cube stands 5 meters by 5 meters by 5 meters and is housed deep inside Foundation walls and kept unconscious through round-the-clock sedatives and fed intravenously. SCP-2019 is highly resistant, despite its unassuming appearance. Any damage it incurs, it regenerates quickly in a matter of seconds. On the forward-facing side of the cube, there are 37 eyes resembling human eyes. SCP-2019 is able to move these eyes freely through the membrane in order to see around itself in a 360-degree radius. SCP-2019 has been recorded to sprout tentacular limbs of sorts to allow itself to move. Now, SCP-2019 displays an interesting creation ability, being able to conjure physical objects and even organic beings into reality. The most occurring evidence of this power is its tendency to grow additional brains. During regular monitoring, it's been recorded to grow additional brains at a rate of once every 2 months under favorable conditions. In order to keep SCP-2019 docile, the Foundation has been ordered to always limit it to 1 brain at a time, with all extraneous ones being removed surgically. SCP-2019 is highly intelligent. Interviews with SCP-2019 have been illuminating. While SCP-2019 cannot verbalize directly, it is able to communicate with signs and visualizations, allowing us to understand it better. SCP-2019 has told us that it was banished by the rest of its species for being an outsider, and that its home is far away from here. Although it has been prone to acts of aggression around Foundation staff, it will still be contained for study and general protection. Number 4. SCP-2020. SCP-2020 is a Euclid class entity, a sapient bipedal humanoid entity standing approximately 7 feet tall. It possesses unnaturally long and thin limbs, and I am not describing myself, and it most closely resembles descriptions of little gray men that have been reported over the years. It's likely that SCP-2020 or a member of its species are what was spotted during the Roswell incident. SCP-2020 is composed primarily of a natural form of rubber that appears to serve all bodily functions: musculature, circulatory, and skeletal. SCP-2020 maintains a very simple diet, subsisting solely on paper and water for sustenance. Interestingly, in all time since the Foundation began observing SCP-2020, it has not displayed any visible signs of aging or any signs of growth. Further studies of its biology have been halted, as SCP-2020 is surprisingly resistant to any tearing, so sample studies cannot be collected. Research has been temporarily suspended. Socially, SCP-2020 displays several behaviors common with humans, such as its desire to learn, its desire to interact with humans, and its bizarre semi-understanding of social cues. It understands and speaks English proficiently, even answering to certain names. It's quite friendly to Foundation staff and eager to talk. It claims to have originated from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization, but repeated questioning has produced wildly varying answers from SCP-2020 on the nature of said civilization, such as its technological prowess and other details. It seems most pleased when prompted to speak of its ideas for writing, often quite enthusiastically and jovially sharing its ideas for stories to researchers who are interviewing it. It claims it has a strong desire to be a science fiction writer. Slightly amusing to Foundation scientists, when interviewed, SCP-2020 is happy to share its many ideas, but never actually feels compelled to write any of them down, complaining that it's unable to choose a concept to focus on from its many, many ideas. Of note, during these interviews with SCP-2020 from Foundation members are that a number of its plot ideas for stories are rife with cliché and are often unfinished and quickly thought out. Nonetheless, researchers have reported finding 2020 a pleasant conversationalist, enjoying their sessions together. Number 3. SCP-2362. SCP-2362 is a Keter class object and is the designation of the dwarf star Pluto, an interior Kuiper belt object. Public knowledge of SCP-2362 has been suppressed, intentionally of course, in order to decrease public interest in SCP-2362. In 1983, Foundation researchers uncovered that SCP-2362, formerly designated internally as Pluto, is an organic composition functioning like a shell for something, housing an entity hereto referred to as SCP-2362-1. It is an approximately 900-kilometer long object resembling a bell-shaped mass with 13 flowing tentacles behind it, most closely resembling a jellyfish. A research probe, Orpheus, was sent towards the dwarf planet in 2006 to confirm this hypothesis hypothesis that the planet was actually an organic entity. The research was fascinating. A fissure was detected on the surface of the object's southern pole, measuring approximately 50 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide. A repeated surveillance showed the fissure growing daily, increasing in size dramatically. As in a few weeks, the fissure grew from a meager 50 kilometers long to a staggering 950 kilometers long and 370 kilometers in width. After nearly 2 months of observation, 13 masses were spotted sprouting from the southern fissure. After 52 days, the fissure widened, revealing SCP-2362, splitting into 2 halves of one shell and releasing SCP-2362-1, the jellyfish entity. Now, SCP-2362-1's motives are currently unknown, as well as any of its biological functions or drives. What little we do know of it is that it is somehow able to propel itself through space by expanding and contracting its appendages. The current trajectory that it appears to be following suggests that it will leave our solar system within the next 100 years, and as such, it is not considered a threatening object, although it will continuously be monitored by Foundation probes for your security. Number 2. SCP-163. SCP-163 is a safe class object of extraterrestrial origins. SCP-163 is a sapient organism, standing roughly 6.5 feet tall. Its body is roughly cylindrical, with a circular mouth at the bottom, an approximation of a head at the top, and 8 3-jointed legs circling around the body. SCP-163 has many specialized unique limbs to its species, including 2 prehensile feeding limbs on either side of the mouth, 2 arms near the top of its body used for delicate precision manipulating, 2 larger arms located closer to its legs used for heavier manipulation, and 2 appendages of indeterminate function located between the legs and mouths, but it appears they have been amputated prior to SCP-163's retrieval. SCP-163 was discovered crashed inside a spacecraft in the Andes Mountains and discovered by local miners. The spacecraft had largely been scavenged, but SCP-163 had been kept encased, hidden in stasis. Upon discovery, the retrieval crews brought it to the Foundation, where it was given adequate accommodations. A receiving room with an airlock with room for guests, a storage room where SCP-163 is allowed to keep approved objects, a workshop as well as a dining room, and a sleeping quarters where SCP-163 can rest. SCP-163 displays very good behavior. Its outstanding good behavior is notable by Foundation standards. As such, it is allowed to take short sabbatical trips around the facility, accompanied by a junior researcher for supervision, of course. SCP-163 and any researchers present need to be equipped with isolation suits in order to prevent any cross-contamination between species. SCP-163 displays an advanced level of intelligence, a deep understanding of its own technology, and an ability to express itself artistically when given painting supplies, and has made several attempts to communicate with Foundation personnel. Difficulties have arisen, of course, because SCP-163 is unable to verbalize and only has a rudimentary ability to gesture by furrowing its skin slightly. One of the more docile entries housed by Foundation walls, SCP-163 has been an indelible asset in growing to understand our place in the universe. Number 1. SCP-1281. SCP-1281 is a large safe class object, a biomechanical entity that was found during a routine containment operation of SCP-2362, if you remember from earlier. SCP-1281 is a vaguely teardrop-shaped entity, measuring roughly 12 meters from end to end and 11 meters across. It's spotted with dish-shaped structures on the surface that presumably serve to function as receivers for electromagnetic energy. Several elements and fragments of other mechanical parts are present across the surface of SCP-1281, intimating that more appendages were present at one point, possibly having been damaged. The biological elements of SCP-1281 appear to have grown completely over a technological mechanical frame designed to live in deep space. It's theorized that SCP-1281 was designed for deep space interstellar travel, but a majority of its essential systems had been damaged by unknown sources. Carbon dating has suggested that SCP-1281 is upwards of 1.3 billion years old. SCP-1281 attempted several times to broadcast a message to Foundation researchers, initially broadcasting solely simple binary codes and mathematical concepts. Eventually, it was able to maintain a conversation with our researchers, where it revealed that itself had been sent to share a message from its creator. Paraphrasing slightly, it spoke of its home species and planet that had died off, and wanted to relay its message to other species to warn them, telling them that they must light the darkness. Through SCP-1281, which was known as the Harbinger from its species, this lost species is able to live on in a way, if only through the proof of SCP-1281. After this broadcast, SCP-1281 had asked its interviewer if it had done its job well, if it had performed well. It shut off shortly thereafter. The researcher told it that it did in fact do a good job, and thanked it for its service. The researcher was reprimanded afterwards for breaking protocol for provoking an emotional response.
Number 5 on this list is the WOW signal. The WOW signal is a sound that an astronomer received many years ago that, as of right now, is probably the closest thing we've ever gotten to alien contact. Now, I do want to say that just because we got this signal doesn't mean that they're living among us. However, it does give a strong indication that they're out there in the first place, which is frankly half the battle. Intelligencer writes, in 1977, Ohio State's Big Ear Radio telescope intercepted a 72-second burst of sound that bore signs of having come from interstellar space, which could be a sign of extraterrestrial communication. The anomaly measured 1,420 megahertz, a frequency in the water hole, the term for a radio emission range thought ideal for intergalactic messages because it's unusually quiet. Jerry Amon, the astronomer who spotted it, was so excited that he scribbled a giant "wow" on his printout. Astronomers' explanations for the bizarre phenomenon include secret spy satellites and a passing comet nobody knew about in 1977. But many admit nothing explains it adequately, and even if the signal doesn't prove aliens exist, it's still a tug on the cosmic fishing line. To date, it remains the best evidence of alien communication ever obtained. So WOW is right in this case. To receive something like that is a very strong indication that not only is there life out in the universe, but it's also intelligent life. At least intelligent enough to be operating sound systems powerful enough to emit such a frequency in the first place. Again, it's not proof that they're assuredly here on Earth, but it's a good start for sure. Number 4 on this list is habitable planets. Scientists are currently finding more and more planets that are in what is called the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone is the area from a star that is not too cold and also not too hot, so it should be able to support life from how we've come to understand it. As science learns more and more about these planets, there have been a few that have surfaced that scientists are particularly bullish about. Proxima b, TRAPPIST-1 system, LHS-114-OB, Ross-128b, GJ-121-4b. Now, those probably mean absolutely nothing to you at all, but those are all the planets that have been discovered to be in the Goldilocks zone and could support life. They are also all the planets that people have reported scientists not wanting to talk about. There's a bit of a conspiracy theory going on right now that scientists have actually discovered proof of alien life in these locations, but are hiding it from the public so as to not start a mass chaos. Now, this is all speculation, but why else would these scientists want to hide information about planets that are apparently in the perfect spot to harbor life? Hard to say for sure, but aliens are definitely a possibility. Number 3 on this list is the numbers game. The universe has widely been believed to be infinite. That means it's really freaking big. If the universe is infinite, then it only makes sense that there would be at least some place out there that has other life. That, my friends, is basically the numbers game. BBC writes, most scientists agree that alien life almost certainly exists in the universe somewhere. Our galaxy contains in the region of 300 billion stars, and we're now discovering planets traveling around these stars. The more we look and the more technology we put out there, the more of these exoplanets we find. To date, we've detected around 4,000, and that's just in our galaxy. If we look at the universe as a whole, then there are approximately 200 billion galaxies. Why would life just occur here? We're pretty convinced it's out there, says space scientist Maggie Adarin-Pocock. It is purely a numbers game, it is a probability. So this argument makes a lot of sense to me, guys. 200 billion galaxies, that is a lot of galaxies and a lot of stars in those galaxies, and basically just a lot of chances to have life appear. Now, this life doesn't necessarily need to be living among us. It could be out in the universe waiting to be found, but similar to our WOW signal example, this is a great start. It's widely believed in the scientific community that there is life out there, and who knows, maybe it's here too. Number 2 on this list is the billionaires. Now, this is going to be a bit of a fallacy because I'm going to appeal to authority with this one. Basically, I'm going to say that there are a bunch of smart, powerful and rich people out there who believe in the existence and presence of aliens, and therefore we should too. Now, I understand that this is a fallacy and not concrete evidence, but I do believe that acknowledging these people's opinions and at least questioning why they might be thinking this way, well, that's important. Let's name off a few people who are currently obsessed with space travel and contacting aliens. Robert Bigelow, Elon Musk, Paul Allen, Yuri Milner, Jeff Bezos, Franklin Antonio. What do these gentlemen have in common? Well, they are all super rich and they are all fascinated with space and aliens. Now, this isn't proof of anything. This isn't evidence that says aliens are among us, but I do think that it's a sign. If I saw these men all investing in the same stock, then I would also invest in that same stock. If I saw all of these men looking at the same thing, and in this case aliens and space travel, and throwing billions of dollars at it, then I'd wonder to myself, why are they doing that? Well, they're probably doing that because they seem to think that aliens are in fact real and potentially are among us. I can comfortably acknowledge that every single one of those people that I listed is more intelligent than I am, and if every one of them are deeply invested in aliens, then I think that's a sign maybe we should be as well. And finally, number 1 on this list is the encounters. Sometimes we think of encounters with aliens as being few and far between, or that those who have had encounters with said aliens are off their rocker or aren't being truthful. Based on the amount of encounters that we've had and the individuals or groups involved in said encounters, both of those assumptions are categorically false. The fact of the matter is that there have been hundreds, thousands of encounters that humans have had with potential alien life throughout the years. Detailed accounts of everything that went down. Stuff that doesn't seem likely for someone to make up. Whether it be Barney and Betty Hill's abduction, Antonio Villas-Boas, the Foo Fighters, the Kecksburg UFO crash, Kenneth Arnold's incident, the Phoenix Lights, or any of the other many notable encounters that have happened in the past, no one can deny that people have been seeing aliens for quite a while. So picking an encounter at random, let's talk about the Travis Walton abduction. This is just another one of the many encounters that hit the big news after it happened. Intelligencer says, in 1975, a team of loggers claimed their 22-year-old co-worker, Travis Walton, disappeared for 5 days after a glowing disc in the Arizona woods zapped him with a bluish ray. Intrigued, he'd reportedly wandered underneath the hovering object and it abducted him. He claims he awoke on a table in a sterile-looking room surrounded by 3 well-developed fetuses wearing tan robes. He tried to flee, passed out, then regained consciousness only once the aliens had ditched him on the Arizona roadside. The news blew up when Walton was finally found. Apparently, him and the group of guys passed lie detector tests, and Walton himself was taken to a hypnotist to try and see if he was lying, which he wasn't. So in this case, it's clear Walton at least wholeheartedly believes he's telling the truth. Also, if he wasn't telling the truth, or that's not what happened to him, then where the heck was he for 5 entire days? A guy just vanished off of the face of the planet for 5 days and is found walking along the roadside in Arizona later? Like, that doesn't just happen, folks. Due to the extensive amount of encounters and the detail to which the stories are described, how can we say without a doubt that aliens aren't living among us? I'll answer that for you. We can't.
Number 5. Music on the Moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with mission control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with Mission Control, they filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunin, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers, so we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if hypothetically alien life were discovered makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the 3 frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, but when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their camera's memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information? Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the Sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the Sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the Sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our Sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the Sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the Sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the Sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch. But 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different SOHO camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the Sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the Moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the Moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the Moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels, one that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while, observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly, I can't do anything. Film it? God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us. In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3, NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch, but sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward, saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2, the MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass." With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer.
Number 5. Roswell. So, if we're going to be discussing NASA conspiracy theories, only makes sense to start out one of the time-tested conspiracy theories before we get into the truly wild ones. So let's start with one of the most infamous conspiracies, that an alien craft landed in Roswell, New Mexico. It was 1947 when a rancher discovered bizarre debris on his property, thin, foil, and metal, not looking like anything he'd ever seen before, describing it as looking like it was part of a giant kite. After stories 2 weeks earlier of a civilian pilot, one Kenneth Arnold, broke headlines by telling the world he'd seen a flying saucer, the rancher told media that he suspected the debris he had found had belonged to a similar downed alien craft. Now the Air Force got wind of this and were interested in the story, naturally, and came to recover the debris off the property, leading to an infamous headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region," and from there, conspiracy theories would run rampant over as to what was happening in Roswell, around it, and in the skies. No one really knew for sure what was happening. All anyone knew is that the government was being very cloak and dagger, hush hush about whatever it was that had crashed onto that farmer's property. Was it from a spacefaring race? Had the government really captured a downed alien craft? Were they using it to reverse engineer new technology? These were the wild questions everybody was asking amidst the story of the UFO crash landing. On top of that were whispers and stories of footage of an alien autopsy conducted at a secret research base, claims that there were leaked blueprints for US developed UFO technology. Those were some of the more colorful theories. Now the official story is that the debris recovered was from a weather balloon being used to record sound waves caused by Soviet nuclear testing, but for years the story was out and UFO and flying saucer fever was at an all-time high. This one event probably did more single-handedly to fuel conspiracy theory and government distrust on the subject of aliens more than anything else in history, and to this day is probably still one of the most famous cases of UFO sightings. Now whether or not you believe the official story is one thing, but we may never know the full story. Number 4. NASA's a fraud. Okay, let's get into it. Among conspiracy theorists, there's a not totally unpopular theory that all NASA does, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is a totally bogus shell company that exists solely to burn up taxpayer money, working tirelessly to create a smokescreen propaganda show for the American public. And all of these rocket launches have all just been expensive charades, and all the imagery retrieved from the stars are just complicated CGI renderings, and all the astronauts are very well trained actors. And if you're detecting more than a bit of cynical sarcasm in my voice, it's because, wow, this one's a little out there even for me. I'm an avid enjoyer of a good conspiracy theory, but yeah, this one doesn't hold too much water. It's mostly popular on Twitter, and if you check out the hashtag hashtag NASA hoax after this video, you can scroll through some good stuff. The main arguments for this theory are similar to claims that the moon landing was faked, and put a pin in that because we will get into that later in the video in more detail. Believers of this theory claim that NASA uses wild special effects for photos from space, or their photos from inside rockets, and all their launches are fake, and I'll be honest, this one just seems like a lot of work for I'm not sure what kind of payoff. It actually seems like it would just be easier to build rockets and fly them into space than do all this stuff. I don't personally believe the moon landing was fake, but I can understand where that theory is coming from. Theoretically, why the organization would do it. It's important to the space race. But the whole agency being a fraud, well, I don't know. For one thing, they've really committed to this bit for the last 50 years, if that's true. Another is that NASA does a lot more than just launching rockets, and the innovations they've made for their astronauts benefit humanity as a whole. For example, the satellites they put into Earth's orbit, without that you wouldn't have your phone, you wouldn't have GPS software, even just little things like the advancements in computer software, everyday stuff like memory foam, freeze-dried food, water purification technology. They did make all of these things, which aren't fake. So I'm not gonna outright say I think this conspiracy might be a little out of this world, but I'm also gonna say if there really is no NASA, it is amazing they've managed to keep this under such tight wraps for so long. Number 3, the 9th planet. Now this one's a fun conspiracy because it's totally out there. All the way up in the solar system. This conspiracy is of the doomsday variety, saying that there's a hypothetical 9th planet out there that's just waiting at the edge of the solar system, waiting to cause trouble as it poses a grave threat to humanity and the Earth as a whole. This celestial body of destruction is allegedly supposed to hurl all sorts of nasty asteroids and comets our way, like a sentient malevolent force of evil, and it's gonna pummel our planet with all these space rocks, and I think in the next Avengers movie they're gonna take it down. Now this alleged 9th planet is the focus of a larger, pretty well documented conspiracy theory unofficially called the Nibiru Cataclysm. And let me do my best to parse this one for you. A Wisconsinite named Nancy Leader claims that as a young girl, she was contacted by an alien race called the Zetans, who, not to discredit her, I'm pretty sure was the alien race from the Fallout 3 DLC that took place in space, but whatever. Leader claims that the Zetans contacted her when she was young and implanted her with an intergalactic communication system, and throughout the 90s, Leader would preach the good word about the Zetans, but also to warn people about an incoming danger from Planet X, this unknown 9th planet beyond Neptune that was going to make its way to Earth and end all civilization. Now, although it was initially named Planet X, it eventually caught the name Nibiru, referencing these ancient Mesopotamian religious texts referring to a mythical giant planet called Nibiru or Marduk that passes by Earth every 3,600 years, bringing its sentient beings closer to humanity, with some people believing these beings are celestial gods. Whew, that's a whole lot of words. So what about this wild theory is true? Well, NASA has been researching the possibility of a 9th planet for years and years, as there is some reasonable speculation that there could be something inside our solar system just outside of Neptune we haven't seen. However, no danger of this mystery planet hurling any comets at us, and whether or not it's carrying a race of hyper-intelligent Satans who are going to destroy us all remains to be seen. It's worth noting that as part of Leader's conspiracy, she's alleged the Earth would have been destroyed 3 times now, but it keeps getting delayed. So hey, better late than never, right? Number 2, secret life on Mars. In 1971, British philosopher David Bowie posed a question, asking, is there life on Mars? He also made some pretty bold claims about spiders on Mars and their guitar playing prowess. Since then, it's a question that's raged in the back of our minds. Is there something waiting for us out on the red planet? One of the first bits of kindling for this fire of conspiracy was in 1976. A photo released from the Viking 1 and Viking 2 orbiters across Mars showed what looked like an almost perfectly sculpted depiction of a human being's face on the surface of Mars. I mean, look at it, it's downright uncanny. A nose, a mouth, eyes, it looks exactly like a person. This led to some wild theorizing that there was something intelligent, alive on Mars that had made contact with humanity, or perhaps even looked like humans, and had sculpted this effigy in clear view of our cameras in hopes to make contact, or perhaps some ancient civilization built it, like that guy on the History Channel who's always doing this. Aliens. I don't know his name. Unfortunately for all, later photos of the rock formation would show that, well, it was just a big rock, and the face on Mars was not much more than a mix of an optical illusion and the human brain's desire to see patterns that aren't there. Sorry. This wouldn't be the only time something like this happened though. In 2008, a similar phenomenon would be recorded, and everybody's heart would race when the Opportunity rover brought back a photo of what looked like a human woman on Mars, or quite honestly Bigfoot, because what I see here is Bigfoot. Unfortunately, similar to the face on Mars, this is just a rock formation taken at just the right right angle with the light hitting it just the right way to trick our eyes. Another phenomenon known as the spiders from Mars, unrelated to David Bowie, is present on Mars, where giant black patterns appear on the surface looking like humongous spiders or webs, leading some to believe this could be the proof of Martians. But these were eventually discovered to just be remnants of gas that had cracked through ice on Mars' surface. So until the CEO of Twitter can get that rocket working and get somebody up there, seems like we've still got a way to go before we find that life on Mars. Sorry, Bowie. Number 1, the moon landing. Right, well, I'm sorry to make you wait so long for it, but I gotta keep you to the end of the video somehow. I wanted to save the best for last and cap it off with the most famous NASA conspiracy, and maybe one of the most famous conspiracy theories of all time. The moon landing didn't happen. Total fake. Right? That's it. That's the video. Never happened. Oh, okay. You want me to talk about it? I can do that. Yeah, no worries. Let's dissect it a little bit then. So, the biggest arguments for the moon landing being totally fake is that there's no stars in the sky in the photos, the US flag is flowing as if it's blowing valiantly in the wind, and there are footprints but no marks from the lunar modules. Now, all of this is presented as being totally irrefutable, but in actuality, there's answers for all of these. The glow of the moon washes out the stars. The flag had metal rods sewn into it, so it looks like it was blowing, because otherwise it would just hang straight down and not look that cool. And the lunar module's mass was distributed much wider than any of the astronauts' boots, and therefore didn't leave any impressions. But of course, what if the person who filmed the moon landings was such a master of the art? He could fake it better than anyone else could because of his filmmaking prowess, because he made a space movie a few years earlier. Now this is maybe my favorite conspiracy theory ever, is that legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick was commissioned by the US government to film the moon landing because of his expertise on 2001: A Space Odyssey. This theory is outrageous and ultimately harmless. It's very fun. Stanley Kubrick was a notorious perfectionist and had already shown that he was capable of filming a perfectly believable setting in space, so naturally he'd be the government's perfect choice. There are some who believe The Shining is secretly a confessional allegory for Kubrick's involvement in the faking of the moon landing, with some theorists believing things like Danny Torrance wearing a Apollo rocket sweater that's got a little 11 on the bottom, or the Grady twins referencing the Gemini space program, or even the infamous all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy thing on the typewriter is supposed to be a nod with the ALL spelling out A11. It's very crazy, like red tape stuff. And if you're really interested, this theory is documented on the internet, and regardless of the truth, wildly entertaining. Personally, I think Kubrick did film the moon landing, but because he was such a notorious perfectionist, he insisted they film on location and made NASA develop a space program to fly to the moon to carry out his vision.
Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, "Guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013 and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object." Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. Its reduced size and quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful to not only the American public, but the world." Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Really? Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The space fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control. "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them that what he was looking at, quote, "didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure." NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jett had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 1947 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years includes shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flapping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted.
In 5th place, we have a 2014 secret mission in Africa. At the time, a NASA official confirmed that one of the agency's aircrafts had been spotted on an American military airstrip in eastern Africa, but like a series of US military officials, declined to say what the space agency's high-tech bird was doing there. Seriously, he gave the most legalese answer ever. Enjoy chuckling at this statement. "I really can't give you any of the details. You know, the airplane was there, you see it in the picture, but I really can't tell you what it was for." A big from me. Anyone else? The broad-winged white plane belonging to the agency was photographed by the satellite company Digital Globe, sitting next to some tilt-rotor aircraft at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. A NASA website that tracks the agency's 3 WB-57s shows that one of its planes, number 926, was on a foreign deployment from July to November of that year. A NASA handbook for the WB-57 posted online lists 14 international deployment sites for the aircraft around the world, but the American base that we just mentioned isn't one of them. The Pentagon declined to answer any questions questions about a NASA aircraft in Djibouti, and a spokesperson for the Air Force Space Command, which has a closer relationship with NASA, said they wouldn't have operational knowledge of a mission on the continent. AFRICOM, the U.S. military's Africa Command, would only say that aircraft from a variety of agencies and nations perform diverse missions from Camp Lemonnier in support of the U.S. and allied military peace and security operations in the region, which spans East Africa and the Mideast. A NASA spokesperson said that their WB-57 aircraft does a lot of work with a variety of different customers from the government, from industry, academia, including the Defense Department. Totally not suspicious at all. According to NASA's website, the WB-57s have been flying research missions since the early 1970s and continue to be an asset to the scientific community, with professional, reliable, customer-oriented service designed to meet all scientific objectives. A government website devoted to the converted old planes describes a mission in Costa Rica to explore the tropical upper troposphere and lower stratosphere, and another to collect cosmic dust from comets and asteroids in the Earth's upper atmosphere, among many others. A variation of the aircraft was used to gather air samples from above-ground nuclear tests conducted by other countries. Sure, only other countries. The military may be interested in more than just scientific objectives, since a plane can fly nearly as high as the famed U-2 spy plane and carry more weight, including an array of high-tech imagery and communications equipment. One previous mission was described by the head of the military's fringe tech specialists at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency to the House Subcommittee on Intelligence as a kind of mass, three-dimensional terrain mapping. She said that a WB-57 was deployed to Afghanistan for a few months beginning late 2010 and collected over 70,000 square kilometers of terrain data, so information on about 10% of the country. This expert said she was confident the system could have mapped half the country, so a civilian who worked with the WB-57 program in Afghanistan and who asked not to be identified due to, reasons, told some folks that the plane is highly customizable, using sometimes one-off configurations depending on the objectives of the project. And for now, the military isn't saying any more. And whatever the mission was, it appears to be over. According to NASA, all 3 WB-57s are now back in the US, with their status listed as inactive. Let me know in the comments what y'all theories are as to why the plane was mysteriously in Africa. My guess, another Area 51 or Roswell incident that they wanted to keep covered up. In 4th place, the alligator problem. I don't really like talking about things that, off me, with, alligators, crocodiles, sharks, and spiders being a few that make me skittish, but for the sake of information, you folks are worth it. The Kennedy Space Center is full of the, scaly snappers. The center is located on Merritt Island, a small mass of land off of the east coast of Florida that isn't technically an island, but shh. Despite being the most famous landmark on the island, the NASA complex isn't the only thing there. There's the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to 1,000 species of plants and animals. They home a variety of sea turtles, manatees, bobcats, bald eagles, and more. Oh, and we can't forget about the gators. So maybe one of the reasons why the space shuttle program was canceled was because people didn't want to have to keep, clearing alligators off the runway every time a shuttle came into land. Honest to goodness. NASA has the ability to restrict human access to the site, should they need it, but how do you go about telling a man-eating reptile what to do? According to the agency, interactions between their staff and the gators is rare, but that's exactly what they would say. Next thing you know, they'll have hijacked a rocket. Okay, no. That was one thing I was very glad I didn't see when I took a vacation to Florida earlier this year, and I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you very much. In 3rd place, we have the theft and use of moon rocks. If anyone has ever read the book Sex on the Moon by Ben Mesrick, then you'll already know the tale of Thad Roberts and his plan to do something very interesting with a bunch of stolen moon rocks. And for folks like myself who didn't know until today, buckle in for something I couldn't make up if I tried. So Thad was a high-flying NASA co-op student with dreams of obtaining multiple degrees and becoming an astronaut. Oh, and he also had dreams of stealing some of NASA's most prized possessions. With help from a team of accomplices, Thad stole 101 grams of moon rocks, valued at a simple little $20 million from NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. For reference, that's slightly less than like half a cup for measurements, and that's about, $20 million. That's more money than I'll see in my lifetime. And hey, if that wasn't bad enough, he also pilfered some dinosaur bones from his university. As a newly minted dino fact expert, I tried finding out what dino the bones were from, but sadly my search has turned up empty, so I'm begging. If anyone out there knows, please tell me in the comments. Thad reportedly laid the rocks out on his bed and proceeded to get down and dirty with his girlfriend on top of them, hence the whole sex on the moon thing. The young man and his fellow thieves were caught in an FBI sting when they were trying to sell the other rocks and were sentenced to time in jail. Just when I think I've seen it all around here, I somehow find myself getting surprised. Boinking on space rocks? Oh, before I move on, during this theft, Thad contaminated the rocks, making them virtually useless to the scientific community. He and his buddies also destroyed 3 decades worth of handwritten research notes by a NASA scientist that had been locked in the safe. The absolute selfishness on display. In second place, we have Viking lander aliens. A woman who claims to be a former NASA employee claims to have seen evidence of the most monumental cover-up in space history in 1979 as she saw two human figures in spacesuits walk calmly towards the Viking lander across the Martian surface. So going by Jackie, she claimed to have been working for NASA, handling downlink telemetry from the lander, which was the first vehicle to send back images of Mars' surface. She and 6 colleagues were watching the Viking rover bustling about over various screens when she spotted, yep, 2 men in spacesuits, which were not the bulky suits they normally used, but they looked protective. They came over the horizon, walking towards the Explorer. Now, naturally, some folks have claimed that the humans may have just been there to polish the lander's solar panels, and yeah, this is my judgy face. It seems a little odd, considering that if, there were humans there, presumably they could just fill the lander with petrol instead, or, take the photographs themselves. Jackie claims that while the folks were maintaining the equipment, their video feed was suddenly cut off without explanation, and when they rushed upstairs to another control room for answers, the door leading to the room controlling the equipment was locked, with paper taped over every crevice to avoid anything being seen. Hello, suspicious red flag alert. Yep, waving my imaginary one. If you don't understand how scary cover-ups are and why this is ranked so highly, then I worry about how blasé you are. Other theorists claim there were secret landings on Mars in the 60s, and the Apollo landings were actually a cover-up for wider exploration of the solar system. Former CIA pilot John Lear claims that NASA landed on Mars in 1966, and that humans adapted to breathe the thin Martian atmosphere. Nigel Watson, author of the Haynes UFO Investigations Manual, said that these accounts of secret space missions seem to be growing in number and remind him of the infamous Project Serpo. Yes, I'll sidetrack. In November of 2005, a contact called Anonymous, who said they worked for the US Defense Intelligence Agency, started sending information about an extraordinary alien exchange program called, Project Serpo. Basing his claims on a 3,000-page document written in the late 1970s, he boldly claimed that 6 aliens were recovered from the Roswell crash. Claims that aliens, living and or dead, were recovered from the Roswell crash are nothing new, but in this case, it was stated that an alien survivor from the crash, called EBE-1, helped to organize 12 specially trained people to visit his home planet, Serpo, in the Zeta Reticuli solar system. This mission occurred in 1965, and they remained there until 1978. During their stay, 2 of them passed away, 2 remained on the planet, and the rest, after returning to Earth, have passed away because of the high levels of radiation they were exposed to on Serpo. I'm just saying, NASA has admitted that there are many things out there that we do not know about, and that UFOs are indeed real. So what else are they hiding? I swear, between them and the US government, I wish I could file like a million Freedom of Information pieces. In first place, we have Operation Paperclip. Alrighty, goofy word time. YouTube land doesn't really like a lot of the words to do with World War II, so bear with me while I talk about the Yahtzees and more. The Third Reich had built up a huge bank of scientists, engineers, and technicians over the course of World War II. And after, the conflict ended, the US wanted to use some of their knowledge for their own gain. Thus came Operation Paperclip, a plan to rehouse hundreds, if not thousands, of former Yahtzee scientists in the US and put them to work on various projects. One such project was, you guessed it, the early days of NASA. Conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, it was largely carried out by special agents of the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps. One of the people brought over in Operation Paperclip was Kurt DeBoos, a former V-2 rocket scientist. He was transferred over to NASA in 1960, and in just over 2 years was named the first ever director of its launch operations center. From there, he oversaw hundreds of rocket launches and played a pivotal role in the preparations for the moon landings. At the time, President Truman spent 16 months before making his decision to approve Operation Paperclip. Several of the Paperclip scientists were later investigated because of their links with the Yahtzee Party during the war. Only one Paperclip scientist, George Rickey, was formally tried for any crime, and no Paperclip scientist was found guilty of any crime in the United States or Germany. Rickey was returned to Germany in 1947 to stand at the Dora trial, where he was acquitted. In 1951, weeks after his US arrival, Walter Schreiber was linked by the Boston Globe to human experiments conducted by Kurt Blohm at Ravensbrück, and to be safe, he immigrated to Argentina with the aid of the US military. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph, under perceived threat of prosecution relating to his connection as operations director for V-2 missile production to the use of forced labor from Middlework, renounced his US citizenship and moved to West Germany, which granted him citizenship. For 50 years, from 1963 to 2013, the Strughold Award, which was named after Hubertus Strughold, the father of space medicine, for his central role in developing innovations like the spacesuit and space life support systems, was the most prestigious award from the Space Medicine Association. On October 1st of 2013, in the aftermath of a Wall Street Journal article published on December 1st of 2012, which highlighted his connection to human experiments during World War II, the Space Medicine Association's executive committee announced that that award had been retired. Operation Paperclip remains a black mark against America's post-war activities, and NASA was unfortunately a part of it. It's a Nikki secret, one that doesn't get any easier to hear. In 5th place, we have Planet 9. So in April of 2016, the New York Post tweeted that a newly discovered planet could destroy Earth as soon as that month. Now, obviously we're all still here, unless we've been replaced by AI or holograms without my knowledge. Honestly, 2016 was the year I transitioned from high school to university, and 'twas a very chaotic year for me. The newspaper was referring to Planet 9, a theoretical planet at the edge of the solar system. Based on earlier considerations, this hypothetical super-Earth-sized planet would have had a predicted mass of 5 to 10 times that of the Earth, an elongated orbit 400 to 800 times as far from the Sun as the Earth. So expert astronomers have suggested that Planet 9 may be the core of a giant planet that was ejected from its original orbit by Jupiter during the genesis of the solar system, captured from another star, once a rogue planet, or that it formed on a distant orbit and was pulled into an eccentric orbit by a passing star. An accompanying video also claimed that the new planet would be throwing all sorts of asteroids and comets at Earth, which would supposedly end up pummeling our planet. Astronomers are actively looking for it to explain motions of some objects in the icy Kuiper Belt, a vast region of icy objects beyond Neptune. I tried to find a pronunciation for that word, couldn't find it, so if I'm wrong, let me know. And while sky surveys such as Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, otherwise known as WISE, and Pan-STARRS did not detect Planet 9, they have not ruled out the existence of a Neptune-diameter object in the outer solar system. When the planet is actually found, it will pose no threat to us, according to the California Institute of Technology's Mike Brown, who is one of the original backers of the Planet 9 theory. While it doesn't have an official moniker right now, it will likely be a name chosen from Roman or Greek mythology. Let me know in the comments what you think it should be, officially named. I personally think Dolos, the spirit of trickery, since NASA seems to want to keep this planet their little secret. In 4th place, we have the McMinnville UFO sighting. Widely regarded by UFOologists to have produced the most important photographs of a UFO, the McMinnville sighting became famous at the height of the 1950s UFO craze. Paul Trink captured the images on camera after his wife, Evelyn, spotted a slow-moving metal disc while feeding the rabbits on their farm. The images went on to be printed in Life magazine. The pair maintained that they had seen a genuine UFO until their deaths, repeating the tale for the Oregonian in 1997, year I was born. Now, before someone starts asking what this has to do with NASA, it absolutely has everything to do with them. They're the ones who cover up UFO sightings and proof. And if you remember, my last point, I'm pretty sure they have a hand in covering up government proof as well. Now, to elaborate on this event, Evelyn Trent started yelling for her husband at about 7:45 p.m. on the evening of May 11th, 1950. She was feeding the rabbits in the yard of the couple's Dayton farm when she saw what she described as a good-sized parachute canopy without the strings. Only silver, bright, mixed with bronze. She later elaborated that it was as pretty as anything she ever saw. Evelyn ran into the house, found her husband and their camera, and the duo raced back into the yard. Paul Trent also spotted what he described as a round, shiny, wingless object hovering in the sky. The 43-year-old farmer managed to take 2 photographs before the flying object disappeared into the evening mist. Fun fact, they're the most famous photos ever to come out of Yamhill County. The McMinnville Telephone Register and the Oregonian published the images in June of 1950, a month after Paul Trent took them. So the delay was because he had to finish off the roll before getting the images developed. Such a struggle sometimes. Life magazine followed the Oregon newspapers, offering its national audience, a gander at the unidentified flying object. Soon, because of this, a U.S. Air Force investigator came to the Trent farm, and while explaining the event to the officer, Paul said that the object was coming in towards them and seemed to be tipped up a little bit. He emphasized it was very bright, almost silvery, and made no noise. The investigator had heard such stories before, since once again, this was the golden age of UFO sightings. But while most alien craft tales are easily debunked after being discovered to be weather balloons or private planes or obvious hoaxes, that wasn't the case with the Trent's photos. In 1967, the Air Force commissioned prominent nuclear physicist Edward U. Condon to lead an exhaustive UFO study. The 950-page report, exhaustive, titled Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects, easily dismissed most of the reported sightings, but it stated at least one, showing a disc-shaped object in flight over Oregon, is classed as difficult to explain in a conventional way. The study determined that the photos were genuine and the Trents were truthful. It specifically declared that this is one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated from genetic to psychological and physical appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object, silvery metallic disc-shaped, tens of meters in diameter, and evidently something, flew within sight of 2 credible witnesses. So explain to me why NASA has never released a statement on this? They're keeping pretty dang quiet, and so is everyone else. What can I say? Secrets make me cranky. In third place, we have life on Venus. So back in the 1970s and 1980s, the Soviet Union sent several uncrewed missions to study the planet Venus. 10 of these Venera probes landed on the surface of the planet and were able to transmit data and images for a few minutes before succumbing to the planet's extreme atmosphere. In 2012, the Russian news service RIA Novosti reported that Leonid, I cannot say his last name but it starts with a K, a scientist who worked on the Venera missions, suggested that the photographs showed living objects moving around on the planet's surface. According to Leonid, certain objects resembled a disk, a black flap, and a scorpion, which emerge, fluctuate, and disappear, referring to their changing location on photographs and traces on the ground. The editors of Solar System Research published an editorial comment in a number of commentary articles from other scientists in their September of 2012 publication of Issue 5, Volume 46 of the journal, to be specific. The issue also includes a second article from Leonid, in which he claims to identify several other life forms and speculates regarding the apparent rich diversity of life around the landing site. It's a lot more rare to get alien spottings from folks outside of the US, and I feel like NASA is just out there covering them up. So I'm glad this one made it to the interwebs, even though folks have tried to explain it away. In second place, we have a government whistleblower. Alrighty. Before I get into it, I'd like to elaborate on how credible this story is. So, the whistleblower in question, David Charles Grush, is a veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO for short, where he served as a representative to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force from 2019 to 2021. From late 2021 to July of 2022, he was the NGA co-lead for UAP analysis and its representative to the task force led by the Department of the Navy, under the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. Whew. At the NGO, David served as a Senior Intelligence Capabilities Integration Officer, cleared at the Top Secret Compartment Information level. From 2016 to 2021, he served with the National Reconnaissance Office as Senior Intelligence Officer and led the production of the NRO Director's Daily Briefing. He was a GS-15 civilian, the military equivalent of a colonel, and has numerous awards and decorations for his participation in covert and clandestine operations to advance American security. I don't know about y'all, but I think this is our most credible witness yet. So David said the recoveries of partial fragments through and up to intact vehicles have been made for decades through present day by the government, its allies, and defense contractors. He said that craft recovery operations are ongoing at various levels of activity, and that individuals on these UAP programs have approached him in his official capacity and disclosed their concerns regarding a multitude of wrongdoings, such as illegal contracting against the federal acquisitions regulations, and other criminality and the suppression of information across a qualified industrial base and academia. Associates who vouched for David said his information was highly sensitive, providing evidence that materials from objects of non-human origin are in the possession of highly secret black government programs. Wow. Multiple government witnesses to boot. Although locations, program names, and other specific data remain classified, the Inspector General and Intelligence Committee staff were provided with these details. Analysis has determined that the objects retrieved are of non-human origin based on the vehicle morphologies and material science testing and the possession of unique atomic arrangements and radiological signatures. The investigation was centered on extensive interviews with high-level intelligence officials, some of whom are directly involved with the program, and they corroborated his information. David is certain that the information has been illegally withheld from Congress to intentionally thwart legitimate congressional oversight of the UAP program. He has also filed a complaint alleging that he suffered illegal retaliation for his confidential disclosures. In his statements, David claimed that UFO legacy programs have, long been concealed within multiple agencies, nesting UAP activities in conventional secret access programs, without appropriate reporting to various oversight authorities. According to the unclassified complaint, in July of 2021, he had confidentially provided classified information to the Department of Defense Inspector General concerning the withholding of UAP-related information from Congress. Christopher Mellon, who spent nearly 20 years in the U.S. intelligence community and served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, has worked with Congress for years on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP for short. He has mentioned that a number of well-placed current and former officials have shared detailed information with him, including the location where a craft was abandoned and recovered. He claims the reason more folks haven't come forward is due to a lack of trust in the leadership of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, established by Congress. The assumption that the United States alone has bullied the other nations into maintaining the secrecy for nearly a century continues to uphold as the primary consensus amongst the public at large. So you're telling me that credible US government officials have been adamant that the government is hiding things? Sounds right to me. In first place, we have Viking lander aliens. A woman who claims to be a former NASA employee claims to have seen evidence of the most monumental cover-up in space history back in 1979, when she saw two human figures in spacesuits walk calmly toward towards the Viking lander across the Martian surface. Going by Jackie, she claimed to have been working for NASA, handling downlink telemetry from the lander, which was the first vehicle to send back images of Mars' surface when she saw 2 people walking on the surface. She and 6 colleagues were watching the Viking rover, bustling about all over various screens when she spotted 2 men in spacesuits, which were not the bulky suits that they normally used at the time, but looked safe. They came over the horizon, walking, right to the Viking Explorer. Naturally, some folks have claimed that the humans may have just been there to polish the lander's solar panels, but that seems a little odd, considering if there were, just humans there, they could have just filled the lander with petrol instead, or take the photographs themselves. Jackie claims that while the folks were maintaining the equipment, their video feed was suddenly cut off without explanation, and when they rushed upstairs for answers, the door leading to the room controlling the equipment was locked, with paper taped over every crevice to avoid anything being seen. Hello? Suspicious red flag alert. If you don't understand how scary cover-ups are and why this is ranked so highly, then I worry about how blasé you are. Other theorists claim there were secret landings on Mars in the 60s, and the Apollo landings were actually a cover-up for wider exploration of the solar system. Former CIA pilot John Lear claims that NASA landed on Mars in 1966, and that humans adapted to breathe the thin Martian atmosphere. Nigel Watson, author of the Haynes UFO Investigations Manual, said that these accounts of secret space missions seem to be growing in number, and remind him of the infamous Project Serpo. Yep, I'll sidetrack. In November of 2005, a contact called Anonymous, who said they worked for the US Defense Intelligence Agency, started sending information about an extraordinary alien exchange program called Project Serpo. Basing his claims on a 3,000-page document written in the late 1970s, he boldly claimed that 6 aliens were recovered from the Roswell crash. Claims that aliens living and or dead were recovered from the Roswell crash are nothing new, but in this case it was stated that an alien survivor from the crash, called EBE-1, helped to organize 12 specially trained people to visit his home planet, Serpo, in the Zeta Reticuli solar system. This mission occurred in 1965 and they remained there until 1978. During their stay, 2 of them died, 2 remained on the planet, and the rest, after returning to Earth, have died because of the high levels of radiation they were exposed to. I'm just saying, NASA has admitted that there are many things out there that we do not know about, and that UFOs are indeed real. So, what other secrets are they hiding? I swear between them and the US government, I wish I could file a million Freedom of Information pieces.
Number 5. The training is brutal. When you were young, did you ever dream of being an astronaut? I think most of us did. Dreaming of being a cosmic sailor, soaring through the Milky Way. I know I certainly did. I thought about how I'd ace the training. I'd be the perfect astronaut. I'd be this golden-haired hero of space, like a Luke Skywalker or a guy on an old pulp novel cover or something. Well, the movies and the media makes being an astronaut out to being a lot more glamorous and a lot easier than it is. I mean, we saw Homer Simpson do it and we figured we all could. But the truth is, they really do not take just about anybody. You already need to be a brilliant scientist and have an exceptional, spotless military career. So they're not just taking anybody, they are taking the best of the best of the best, the top 1% of the 1%. And they need people who can withstand incredible tolls on their body and are able to handle any problem that could be thrown their way in space. Turns out going to space, not that easy. These physical tasks include things like wilderness survival training, spending days surviving alone in the wilds on the off chance that your ship crashes on re-entry in the middle of nowhere and you need to be able to fend for yourself before rescue comes. As well, training includes things like swimming laps in a 200-pound spacesuit or spending literally 24 hours in a row submerged underwater to stimulate the feeling of floating around in a giant suit. Or how about taking a trip on the infamous Vomit Comet, the plane that flies in parabolas to induce weightlessness and zero gravity to get your body used to floating around before you do it for real, and more often than not has astronauts tasting what they had for lunch one more time. That's about the most pleasant way I can think to say that. That doesn't quite sound like the fun, carefree adventure I dreamed of as a kid. Number 4, it destroys your body. Even if you are one of those best of the best of the best who can handle the brutal training that thins out the herd, once you actually do get up into space properly, just existing ravages your body in all sorts of fun, terrifying ways you've never thought of. When you think about it, we really are not meant to be up in that environment. It's kind of like a fish trying to survive on land. So it's not much of a surprise that our body kind of reacts violently poorly to the new conditions. Here's a terrible one I bet you didn't know about. I bet you didn't know that astronauts' gloves are so tight and sealed that when they take them off, I'm actually gonna gag, astronauts lose their fingernails. They get pulled like right off, and frequently they break and sprain their fingers just taking their gloves off. Or maybe you didn't know that most astronauts After entering zero gravity for the first time, vomit almost immediately, even if they've had tons of training and simulator experience. And this is not made better at all because, where is that vomit going? It's just floating around you for everyone to see. Literally just being alive in space is bad for your body. You can just be sitting, vibing by the window, and it's gonna do damage to you. Astronauts who spend extended time in a space station report a huge loss of bone density, reporting horrible creaking and pains. They even shrink a little bit. Some astronauts note that when they got back to Earth, their spine had to straighten back out in an incredibly painful process. But when asked what the worst part of space life is, one astronaut, Tim Peake, responded saying, "It's watching the soles of your feet disintegrate." I am gonna do my level best to explain this next thing to you without vomiting, but I cannot promise anything. He described that because astronauts use their feet so rarely in space, their soles start to soften like a newborn baby's. And the feet gradually force off all the dead skin and calluses that you build up over a lifetime of walking. Meaning sometimes astronauts, when they remove their socks, shower the cabin with a lifetime of dead skin flakes and big chunks of foot floating around the space station like the literal most disgusting snow globe imaginable. Number 3, and your mental too. The thing is, it's not just your body that is going to be put through the absolute ringer when you find yourself with a career floating up in the stars. Your mental faculties need to be sharper than anyone and able to deal with anything that could possibly get thrown at you as you're floating up miles away from home. It's no wonder David Bowie and Elton John wrote so many songs about how sad it is to be up in space. Astronauts report feeling a wide array of mental health struggles, reporting that the isolation causes them loneliness, depression, anxiety, stress, fatigue, mood swings, concentration issues, and some even getting full-blown PTSD upon returning back to the Earth. But, I get it. Imagine the workload. Imagine working a grueling day, not just any regular day, a day where if your work goes wrong, you could lead to one of or many of your teammates' deaths, and then having to go to sleep in a cold space station away from your loved ones and do that over and over again for 100 days straight. Imagine you have a bad day at work in space. You can't even go home about it. You gotta go home to space. Sleeping on a space station is far from a cozy night in a crib either. For one, there's constant noise all around you on a space station. Nobody can hear you scream in space, that much is true, but everybody can hear all the engines and computers and all that stuff going off inside the space station, meaning there's never a quiet moment. It's also not as dark as you might hope. Not only do you have to deal with the fact that your sleep cycle is no longer tied to the sunrise and sunset anymore, because you're going to see about 16 of those a day, but you have to tend with flashing lights all over the station from the machinery, but as well lights that are thought to be caused by cosmic rays passing through your eyelids. As well, there's also, no gravity. They definitely tell you that. Imagine having to tie yourself to a wall to avoid bumping your head around a cabin while you're just trying to get your 8 hours and a little REM time. Number 2, brown trout and recycling. Okay. This is going to be the grossest part of the list by far. If you want to skip right ahead to number 1, I get it. There's a reason I put this at number 2, and you'll all understand in a second. Just know I'm a child and I have the sense of humor of an 8-year-old. When you compare all the physical and mental danger astronauts have to face, is going to the toilet scarier than the risk of death? It honestly sounds like it. Peggy Whitson is an astronaut who holds a ton of records. Foremost, she's got the record for the most time spent in space, spending nearly 2 full years in orbit. She's spoken out and said that her least favorite part of living in space is the bathroom. Now, number 1 is considered to be a little easier, but it does not sound enjoyable in any way. A little hose, you attach it and it sucks the urine out, and then a machine converts that into drinking water because, astronauts drink a lot of their own pee. Now, admittedly, it's heavily processed, okay? You're not getting it out of the water cooler, it's not coming out yellow. But on a spaceship, water is sacred. Much like the still suits of Arrakis, all liquids and fluids are recycled. The water you wash your hands with, excrete, or spit out brushing your teeth, all of that is collected, processed, recycled to be drank again. Try not to think about that too much. Every astronaut you've ever seen on the news has drank so much pee. Astronauts have to fill a glorified porta potty pit and then put on a special rubber glove and pack it down nice and compact to be processed. But in zero gravity, you know, things happen, and more often than any astronaut would ever care to admit, sometimes the mission goes a bit bad. Chris Hadfield said his crew would refer to these incidents as brown trouts. I'm not going to explain it, I think you understand. Leroy Chow, retired astronaut, spoke on his time on the station and said sternly that everyone cleans up their own mess when it happens, but he didn't elaborate on what that meant, but you can read through the lines pretty easy. When you were a little kid dreaming about life in space, did you ever consider that the world's best and brightest minds would be putting on the poop glove to catch brown trouts? And I am so sorry for the mental image I have given you. Number 1, danger. And above all else, if it hasn't been made exceedingly clear yet in this video, the life of an astronaut is not an easy one and oftentimes is extremely dangerous, with anything being able to go wrong spelling a certain disaster. Everything needs to be perfect. Now, you could look up countless stories of astronauts in danger, but I'm going to share one from Chris Hadfield because he's a Canadian icon. He spoke to BuzzFeed News about how on his first flight ever, he and fellow astronauts had to navigate a £250,000 space station towards a target the size of a coffee cup on the Russian Mir space station. Hadfield was there to relay the speed and range information to the pilot as they were pulling in for a docking maneuver, which had to be incredibly precise. In Hadfield's own words, if you hit the Mir too soft, the spring mechanisms bounce you off. If you hit the Mir just a little bit too hard, well, then you risk breaking the station in half and ending the lives of everybody on board. So you've got to hit it exactly right. No pressure or anything. When the shuttle crew was about 30 feet away, 2 sensors started telling them 2 different things. One of them said that they were at 32 feet away, and the other one said 20 feet away. Hadfield said, they're either both wrong or one of them is completely wrong. Now what do? There's nobody to ask, and if the crew on board this shuttle doesn't solve this problem in the next 30 seconds, then this is it for everybody. Hadfield described using his thumb to try and measure the distance from the window. This told him they were about 21 feet away, and he used a stopwatch to try and do the math to figure out how fast they were going, and when they should fire thrusters. And well, like since I mentioned, Chris Hadfield is a national hero and not a national tragedy, we know they did end up hitting the target at the correct speed, even with 3 seconds to spare. Hadfield said the shuttle crew didn't even say a word until a few minutes after, when the shock had finally worn off, and one of the members of the crew said, "Hey, we did it, we're actually here."
Number 5. The Pentagon accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with the government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fears that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible, instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these crafts is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP. This was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the AATIP TIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately not surprising. Number 4. The hacker's discovery. In 2002, a Scottish systems administrator and hacker named Gary McKinnon perpetrated the biggest military computer hack of all time by hacking into 97 NASA and US military computers over the span of 13 months. He claimed that the reason for this behavior was to search for evidence of free energy suppression and any other potential cover-ups by NASA of UFOs or technologies that could be useful to the public. Once caught and arrested, there was a lengthy court case to determine whether or not he should be extradited to the United States to serve his sentence. The news focused mainly on the crime and the subsequent court case, so much so that not many people looked into whether or not he found any evidence of what he was looking for. But according to McKinnon, he did. While looking through NASA's computers, he claims that he came across a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He looked at the document and found an Excel sheet containing the ranks and names of several unknown individuals and a sheet with tabs for material transfers between ships. He then searched records for ships with the corresponding names and found nothing, leading him to believe that the ships were part of a covert non-terrestrial initiative. After a lengthy court case, the United Kingdom decided not to extradite him to the United States, claiming that the crime was committed due to mental illness, and that sending him away would be a violation of his human rights. Is this really the case? Or did he find something in those computers that he was able to trade to the United Kingdom's government in order to avoid being shipped abroad? Number 3. The Challenger accusation. On January 28, 1986, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had 7 people on board, 6 astronauts and 1 teacher, who had been selected to be a part of the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. Their mission was to study Halley's Comet as it passed near the Sun and to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite. Due to the novelty of a teacher in space, millions of school children were watching the launch in class when it occurred at 11:39 a.m. Tragically, 73 seconds into the shuttle's launch, Challenger broke apart and all 7 passengers were lost. President Ronald Reagan created the Rogers Commission to investigate the incident. It was discovered that the cause of the accident was the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to act as a seal in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, but had stiffened due to the cold of the day, causing them to be less effective in causing the pressurized gas to leak and burn through an attachment strut and the external propellant tank. The combined stress caused the shuttle to be torn apart. The investigation also found a few more details that caused some scandal for NASA. It was discovered that concerns about the O-rings had been raised by NASA engineers since the early 70s, but that NASA had deemed the component acceptable despite the engineers' protests and suggestions that further reinforcement be given to the rings. In 1980, the NASA Verification Committee requested further tests on the joints the rings were reinforcing to test how they would behave at different temperatures. A test that would have exposed the Challenger's fatal flaw, but the program managers decided that such tests were unnecessary. It turned out that other missions in the years between the request for more tests and the Challenger mission had had problems with the O-rings, with them showing signs of erosion or letting in soot, showing that they were not providing a reliable seal. NASA also claimed that all passengers had met their end instantly and without pain, but it was discovered that the astronauts had discovered their emergency breathing packs, showing that they were alive and trying to survive well after the initial explosion. A member of the commission, Robert B. Hotz, went so far as to accuse NASA of a cover-up in both the Miami Herald and the New York Times, saying that their initial statements about the astronauts and other actions by the space agency were part of a broad effort to keep the public from learning that the Challenger crew members might have survived the disaster if certain precautions had been taken. NASA denied such an effort, but as a result of the commission, NASA had to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance to ensure that future missions did not neglect the safety of their crew in such a fatal way. Number 2. Life on Mars. One of the most common accusations against NASA is that they are covering up evidence of alien life on other planets, specifically Mars. While there are too many of these accusations to dive into in great detail, we will be looking at 2 in particular. Richard Hoagland is one of the many people convinced that there is evidence of ancient civilizations on Mars due to NASA photographs that were taken during the 1976 Viking 1 orbit. These photos show what has been dubbed by believers as the Mars face, a large sphinx-like object. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor sent photos of Mars's surface back to Earth showing only a pile of rocks, noticeably lacking the iconic profile, claiming that it debunked the theory. Hoagland called this a load of baloney, and unearthed a NASA-commissioned report from 1960 recommending that any future discoveries of alien life be kept from the public so as to not disturb the evolutionary flow of the 20th century civilization. Nearly 20 years later, a researcher named Barry de Gregorio, who specializes in the study of microscopic life in Earth's soil, looked at photos released by NASA, and realizing how similar shapes and patterns in the photos were to Ordovician trace fossils he has photographed on Earth, claimed that the Mars pictures appeared to feature trace fossils made by soft-bodied life forms. NASA claims that the shapes are merely rock crystals which are being analyzed. The researcher claims that this is a cover-up, and that he is planning on releasing a report that will blow the lid off of the cover-up. He theorizes that NASA is covering the findings up to avoid jeopardizing their planned 2030 Mars mission. It is hard to say if Mars is or ever was populated by an alien race, but if they were, would NASA tell us if they found evidence once they got there? Number 1. The astronaut accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said how he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that, yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we are not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue. Number 5. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institution to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. Most of the report is not particularly interesting for the purposes of this list, with sections about the implications of a space-derived weather predicting system and the implications of technological byproducts. But there is a section of the report that has garnered much attention over the years about the implications of a discovery of extraterrestrial life. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life, and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas and different ways of life. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers. So, we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if, hypothetically, alien life were discovered, was commissioned makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 3. The MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts, in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation and should be wet. While for the layman this is more confusing than anything, it may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate them. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information on UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and was the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission. And he set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours and 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects and the government's efforts to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made a sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, As Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negatives before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but he never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion, and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about his encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. The Pentagon accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fear that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these craft is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP, but this was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the ATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately, not surprising.
Number 5, the wow signal. We want so badly for aliens to talk to us. We want that more than anything. We've been looking for any sign, no matter how small, that there's intelligent life out there just waiting to come find us. And we will take just about anything at this point. A text, an emoji, maybe just a wow.
Wow.
Well, we might have already had that. See if you get wowed by the story of the wow signal. And can we throw just one Owen Wilson wow in here just for me, just for me? Wow. In 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio picked up a mysterious signal that lasted for 72 seconds. This signal was so strong and unusual that the astronomer who was watching it wrote wow on the printout. No, the aliens didn't send wow, but that would have been way better. This became known as the wow signal, and it remains one of the most interesting pieces of evidence out there in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, this signal was detected by the Big Ear radio telescope, which was up there in space looking for radio signals as part of the SETI program. We've talked about that before on the channel. It stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The signal was very strong and appeared to be coming from a point in the sky near the constellation Sagittarius. I'm an Aquarius personally. The frequency of the signal was consistent with what would be expected from hydrogen atoms that had been accelerated to high speeds. See, I don't know what the that means. Despite numerous attempts to detect the signal again, it's never been observed since. This has led to much speculation about its origin and nature. Now, some scientists have suggested that the signal could be proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, some small sign. While there are others, Scullies of the world who might be doubting a little bit. Others have proposed more mundane explanations such as a natural phenomenon or a human-made satellite, but I think we would all deeply prefer it would be aliens. No, it would be a much more interesting end to the story. The WOW signal remains one of the greatest mysteries in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It raises so many questions about the nature of our universe and our place in it. Will we ever solve the mystery of the WOW signal? Could it really just have been Owen Wilson and we're radiating back that energy? We may never know. But if you're looking for way more mysteries about space, well, Top 5 Scary is the place to be. We've got more videos on space mysteries than there are stars in the sky. And if space mysteries aren't your jam, we got cryptids, conspiracies, true crime, just about anything freaky you can think up, we've done a video on it. Number 4, the Great Attractor. The Great Attractor. I wish that's what they called me. That is not what they called me in high school though. Do you ever feel like you're being pushed through life, pulled towards a certain path you might not necessarily want? Well, talk to your parents and sort out your life path, but you could be feeling that way because the way our galaxy is being pulled towards something called the Great Attractor, which sounds a lot more ominous than it should, I think. That sounds kind of heavy, so let's get into this. What is pulling our galaxy and many others at faster speeds than you'd think? The Great Attractor is a mysterious gravitational anomaly located in the direction of the Centaurus constellation. It's exerting a gravitational force on our galaxy, where we live, where all our stuff is, and many other galaxies, and its exact nature and location remain uncomfortably unknown. The existence of this thing was first brought up in the 70s, when astronomers noticed that galaxies in our sort of galaxy neighborhood appeared to be moving in a direction that could not be explained by the gravity of nearby objects. Instead, they were being pulled towards a point in the sky in the direction of the Centaurus constellation. Pretty weird. Now, the Great Attractor is thought to be a massive cluster of galaxies, a big galaxy suburb, if you will. But its exact location and composition remain currently unknown. It's obscured by the Milky Way's dust and gas, making it kind of hard to get a good look at it and study. Astronomers have tried their hardest, trying to map the distribution of galaxies, trying to determine its location and structure, but like I said, it's pretty difficult and not too much progress has been made. One of the more unsettling aspects of the Great Attractor I find is that it's located in a region of space known as the zone of avoidance. This is an area of the sky that's difficult to observe due to all that dust and gas like I mentioned before, and it's also what my therapist used to call my bedroom. Number 3, the Black Knight Satellite. The Black Knight Satellite sounds like it's something out of the latest Marvel movie where I think all the heroes and villains will fly up to have their big CGI smash them up. But it's actually the name of a mysterious object that is purported to be orbiting the planet and is host to some very colorful and fun conspiracy theories that we're going to dive into. The Black Knight Satellite conspiracy is a very intriguing and mysterious one related to what we got going on up there. It started back in 1954 when newspapers around the world reported that 2 US Air Force pilots spotted a mysterious object in orbit around Earth. If you follow those reports, the object was about 13,000 years old and appeared to be transmitting radio signals. Now since then there have been numerous alleged sightings and claims of radio signals received from the Black Knight satellite. Some conspiracy theorists believe the object is an ancient alien spacecraft sent to observe and monitor Earth from up high. Others believe it is some secret government satellite, or the really wild ones is that it's a remnant of a lost ancient civilization, the Anunnaki or something if you want to throw your hat into that conspiracy ring. There are, of course, many people who dismiss all of this as just misinterpretations of natural phenomena, which again, extremely possible whenever we're describing anything weird happening in space, but it is very fun to imagine and to play pretend, so we'll keep talking like that. The Black Knight satellite is capturing the imaginations of people who believe in it, and I think that's fun to talk about. There are some wild conspiracists who even say that the US and other governments have a big, secret cover-up about what really is going on there, if it's actually aliens watching from up high or a secret government surveillance project, who knows. Now, one of the more interesting pieces of evidence for the satellite is a series of photographs taken by NASA during the STS-88 mission in 1998. These photographs appear to show a large metallic object orbiting around the Earth, but No surprise, NASA has dismissed these claims, saying the object is nothing more than debris or a reflection from the shuttle's windows. So despite there not really being much evidence, the Black Knight satellite will continue to fascinate us and intrigue us. Number 2, the dark side of the moon. Also known as the far side of the moon, and one of the better Pink Floyd albums, and if you haven't set it up to Wizard of Oz, oh, you just gotta. The dark side of the moon has been a source of fascination and mystery for space enthusiasts and the plot line of one of the worst Transformers movies. One of the worst Transformers movies, as if there's a good one. It's the side of the moon that is never visible from Earth, and as a result, we know very little about it. This lack of knowledge has given rise to all sorts of fun and crazy conspiracy theories, ranging from kind of plausible to totally nuts. One of the more popular ones is that there are alien structures or bases on the dark side of the moon. Maybe some like cool relics, like something out of 2001. Some conspiracy theorists believe that NASA and other space agencies have been covering up evidence of all these things, pulling the wool over our eyes. Again, this is literally the plot of the third Transformers movies, where there was Decepticons on the moon. It's around when they started getting really crazy. Conspiracists point to anomalies in photographs taken by missions to the moon, such as the Apollo missions, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, as evidence of these secret alien going-ons on the dark side of the moon. Another theory, and an insane one, is that the moon holds ancient artifacts or evidence of a long-lost civilization. Some people believe that these artifacts could hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe, or even provide evidence of alien life. Now, if we really want to get out there, some conspiracy theorists believe that there are dark forces or malevolent entities lurking on the dark side of the moon. We're talking like ethereal shadow creatures, old gods that would have kept H.P. Lovecraft up at night. And these things could be responsible for all the unexplained phenomena or UFO sightings or mysterious goings-ons in space that we can't explain. It's all old tentacle gods up on the dark side of the moon. Or it could be perfectly explainable. Explainable? Or it could be perfectly explainable. One of the two. They don't hire me for my intellects, I'll tell you that much. They don't hire me for my brain. They hire me because I say words into a camera. And I don't even do that right sometimes. Number 1, space snakes. I've talked about Story Musgrave a few times on this channel, and I'll probably do it again. Namely because his name is Story Musgrave. That is a wild name for an astronaut to have. That's like a Star Wars guy name. Maybe it's fitting then that this man so vehemently claims that he's run into aliens before. Story is, if you'll pardon this pun, a very storied individual who's been to space multiple times and is now an Imagineer at Disney. So I feel like if aliens were going to appear to anyone as an envoy, it would be an astronaut with ties to the most powerful corporation on Earth. Musgrave is a well-respected astronaut. He's been to space 6 times and he spent 1,200 hours in space, so he might know a thing or two. So when he says he's seeing aliens, we prick our ears up a little bit. According to Musgrave, he saw space snakes that were long black objects that looked like they were swimming around in space. He described them as being about 3 to 4 feet with a metallic sort of biomechanical appearance. Think like H.R. Giger's Alien. And he said he saw these things multiple times. NASA has not really commented on this. They didn't put out a press beacon where they said yay aliens or nay aliens. They just kind of ignored it altogether. Now some experts suggested space snakes could have been debris or ice particles that were reflecting light, while others, and I think this is kind of fun, suggested that it could have just been a hallucination caused by the effects of space flight on the human brain. I feel like that particular brand of skepticism is not one you ever hear much when decrying UFO or alien sightings. We never just say, oh, he was probably hallucinating. Me, personally, I don't know. I'm inclined to trust a guy named Story Musgrave. I trust a man who's up in space so many times. It's intriguing, but it is unverified. He says he's seen them multiple times, which I think is kind of interesting. Is there a higher entity trying to contact him? We may never know, but if we do, Top 5 Scary will be the first one to tell you. I promise you that.
In 5th place, we have HD 189773b. Seeing as most of these planets today are only referred to with scientific labels, to make my life easier, I've made the executive decision to give them nicknames. HD 189773b will now be referred to as Snow Globe, purely based on my personal need to see this environment captured in a globe. On October 6th of 2005, a team of astronomers announced the discovery of Snow Globe, which was detected using Doppler spectroscopy. Real-time radial velocity measurements detected the precipitated Shorter-McLaughlin effect caused by the planet passing in front of its star before photometric measurements confirmed that the planet was transiting. In 2006, a team led by Drake Deming announced detection of strong infrared thermal emission from the transiting exoplanet by measuring the flux decrement, or decrease of total light, during its prominent secondary eclipse, which, for those of us who speak regular English, is when the planet passes behind the star. Well, that was a lot easier. The mass of the planet is estimated to be 16% larger than Jupiter's, with the planet completing an orbit around its host star every 2.2 days and an orbital speed of 152.5 kilometers per second. Wild. In 2008, a team of astrophysicists appeared to have detected and monitored the planet's visible light using polarimetry, and the result was confirmed and refined by the same team in 2011. They found that the planet albedo is significantly larger in blue light compared to in red, most probably due to Rayleigh scattering and molecular absorption in the red. The blue color of the planet was confirmed in 2013, which would have made Snow Globe the first planet to have its overall color determined by two different techniques. These measurements in polarized light have since been disputed by two separate teams using more sensitive polarimeters, with the upper limits of the polarimetric signal provided therein. Okay, bear with my pronunciation of the big words, folks. I'm doing my very best here. Your girl is perpetually exhausted. The blueness of the planet may be the result of Rayleigh scattering, which I mentioned before. On July 11th of 2007, a team led by Giovanna Tinetti published the results of their observations using the Spitzer Space Telescope, concluding that there is solid evidence for significant amounts of water vapor in the planet's atmosphere. Follow-up observations made using the Hubble Space Telescope, a very popular telescope, confirmed the presence of water vapor, neutral oxygen, and also the organic compound methane. Later, very large telescope observations also detected the presence of carbon monoxide on the day side of the planet. Kinda dangerous. It is currently unknown how the methane originated, as the planet's high 700 degrees Celsius temperature should cause the water and methane to react, replacing the atmosphere with that scary carbon monoxide. Personally, I get irritable when the weather reaches like the 20s here on Earth, so I know I would not survive that oven at all. Nevertheless, the presence of roughly 0.004% of water vapor fraction by volume in the atmosphere of Snow Globe was confirmed with high-resolution emission spectra taken in 2021. I'm sure after all that fascinating information, someone out there is asking, but Alexa, why wouldn't NASA want us to know about this one? What's scary about it? The weather on Snow Globe is deadly. The winds, made up of silicate particles, blow up to 8,700 kilometers per hour, and observations have found evidence that it rains molten glass horizontally. See, I'm trying to, imagine sideways glass raining down, and I'm drawing a bunch of scary blanks. Personally speaking, that sounds cool to watch from a very safe distance, ergo the nickname, but not up close anytime soon. I don't need glass shards on my side. In fourth place, we have the darkest exoplanet known to date. TRES-2b was discovered on August 21st, 2006 by the Transatlantic Exoplanet Survey by detecting the transit of the planet across its parent star. The discovery was confirmed by the W.M. Keck Observatory on September 8th of 2006 by measuring the radial velocity of the star that hosts TRES-2b. Okay, alrighty, nickname time. I'm thinking midnight. The planet was identified in 2011 as the darkest known exoplanet, reflecting less than 1% of any light that hits it, and it is located 750 light years away from the solar system. I'm talking like worse than charcoal, or the Vantablack 3.0 paint in terms of reflection on the surface of midnight. The planet's mass and radius indicate that it is a gas planet with a bulk composition similar to that of Jupiter. Unlike Jupiter, but similar to many planets detected around other stars, midnight is located very close to its star and belongs to the class of planets known as hot Jupiters. This system was within the field view of the Kepler spacecraft. This planet continues to be studied by other projects, and the parameters are continuously improving. A 2007 study improved stellar and planetary parameters. A 2008 study concluded that the TRES-2 system is a binary star system. Now, this significantly affects the values for the stellar and the planetary parameters. No one really knows why the planet is so dark. One reason could be that an absence of reflective clouds, such as those which make Jupiter so bright due to midnight's proximity to its parent star and the consequent high temperature. Another reason could be the presence in the atmosphere of light-absorbing chemicals such as vaporized sodium, potassium, or titanium oxide. What do you think? Let me know down in those comments. In third place, time to explore WASP-12. I'm sure you folks get the drill by now. I'm thinking. I'm sure you can see the steam pouring out of the top of my head right now. I've got it. Firefly. And no, that's not intentionally a reference to one of my favorite shows, but take it how you will. Firefly is a hot Jupiter Ooh, that sounds familiar. And was discovered on April 1st, 2008 by the SuperWASP Planetary Transit Survey. Yeah, many folks originally thought it was a joke, but I assure you, it isn't. Hot Jupiters, or hot Saturns, are a class of gas giant exoplanets that are inferred to be physically similar to Jupiter, but that have very short orbital periods. The close proximity to their stars and high surface atmosphere temperatures resulted in their informal name, hot Jupiters. Firefly is the hottest planet ever found at a sizzling 2,250 degrees Celsius, as hot as some stars. Now this find could challenge models of how close planets can be to their host stars. Firefly takes only a little over 1 Earth day to orbit its star, in contrast to, the 365.25 days for the Earth to orbit the Sun. Consequently, it has one of the lowest densities for exoplanets, which is inflated by the flux of energy from the star. On December 3rd of 2013, scientists working with the Hubble Space Telescope reported detecting water in the atmosphere of the exoplanet. In December 2017, researchers working on the HST announced that Firefly reflects just 6% of the light that shines on its surface. As a result, the exoplanet has been described as black as asphalt and pitch black. In second place, we have Gliese 667c. Let me know, by the way, if y'all are enjoying the fun little nicknames in the comments. It just makes it easier for my ADHD brain to know which is which if it's a fun name and not a mishmash of letters and numbers. For this beauty, I dub the Two-Faced. It resides a little over 23 light years away from here in the constellation Scorpius and was discovered in 2011 by American and European astronomers. Two-Faced is 4 times as massive as Earth, and it's very close to its star, only less than half the distance that Mercury is from our sun. It takes 23 days and 14 hours for it to complete 1 orbit around its star. Because of this, you would think that, this exoplanet is not able to host life because of its close proximity to its parent star. That's not the case here. Two-Face orbits around a red dwarf star, which is tiny compared to the sun. That means that the Earth and this exoplanet are at roughly the same relative spot in their star's habitable zone. There's just one teeny tiny problem though. This exoplanet is tidal locked, which means it doesn't rotate on its axis. One side of the planet is always facing its star, and the other always facing away. The side that is always facing the star is so scorchingly hot that it would be impossible to live there, as it would melt you alive. Now, the other side that's facing away is so cold that you would instantly freeze. However, what makes this planet possibly able to support human life in the future is the narrow strip of land halfway between its hot and cold side that is just the perfect temperature to support life. But imagine stumbling home one night, you're totally out of it, so tired, and you lose your balance, and that's it. Either you freeze or you burn. It's a bit extreme. I'll stick with Earth. Finally, in our first place, we have Planet 9. Out of everything I've listed today, this is probably what's most likely to land me on some sort of watch list. Hey NASA, if y'all actually released the info you hoard on, aliens coming to Earth and what you've discovered, people wouldn't demand it as much. Planet 9 is the 9th planet in the outer region of the solar system. Sorry Pluto, I promise I'll make it up to you. Its gravitational effects could explain the peculiar clustering of orbits for a group of extreme trans-Neptunian objects that orbit the Sun at distances averaging more than 250 times that of Earth. These ETNOs tend to make their closest approaches to the Sun in one sector, and their orbits are similarly tilted. These alignments suggest that this undiscovered planet may be shepherding the orbits of the most distant known solar system objects. Based on earlier considerations, this super Earth-sized planet would have a predicted mass of 5 to 10 times that of the Earth and an elongated orbit 400 to 800 times as far from the Sun as the Earth. The orbit estimation was refined somewhat in 2021, but the mathematical equation it's too much for my brain to comprehend today. Konstantin Batygin and Michael E. Brown suggested that Planet 9 may be the core of a giant planet that was ejected from its original orbit by Jupiter during the genesis of the solar system, while others proposed that the planet was captured from another star, was once a rogue planet, or that it formed on a distant orbit and was pulled into an eccentric orbit by a passing star. Lots of fun theories to look through. Although sky surveys such as Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer and Pan-STARRS did not detect Planet 9, they have not ruled out the existence of a Neptune diameter object in the outer solar system. The ability of these past sky surveys to detect Planet 9 was dependent on its location and characteristic. Further surveys of the remaining regions are ongoing now, using NEOWISE and the 8-meter Subaru telescope.